the pharma companies in general are running away from therapy. They're just trying to be ketamine, Spravato, which is now selling over $1 billion, projected to maybe go up to $3 billion a year. Major blockbuster, but S-ketamine, one of the isomers of ketamine, approved without therapy. It's sort of the perfect pharma model because pharma is interested in selling drugs. When you combine ketamine with therapy, you get better results, longer durability, and you need less ketamine. The pharma company, Johnson & Johnson, doesn't make any money on the therapy. So we see that the for-profit psychedelic companies are moving more and more towards trying to minimize therapy. And they're even instructing therapists in the room, don't do therapy.
In this episode of the 632 Nanometer podcast, Mike and Xinghui visit Rick Doblin's house for a backyard interview. Rick is a longtime psychedelic research and therapy advocate whose efforts at his organization, MAPS, have changed the way we think about psychedelics. Rick covers his personal journey, philosophy, and strategic work in psychedelic research, and what it takes to work within the system to make meaningful progress.
Rick, thank you for having us at your house. I don't know if you remembered this, but we originally met in a tent at Burning Man, like some kind of event in like 2018. And I think you spoke briefly at that event or something, and I definitely didn't imagine this would be happening, when I first saw you speak, but I was, even back then, I thought you had like really good energy. I had no idea, knew nothing about your work or anything when I saw that. We like to just dive into a hard question starting out. So
the harder the better.
If you're talking to somebody, if you want to explain to someone who's never had a psychedelic experience what a psychedelic experience is, that's like a notoriously hard thing to do. How do you do it? And what in that explanation, like if you had to explain it, why is that potentially therapeutic or valuable?
Well, I would first off just talk about dreams. And I think that we all have psychedelic experiences during our dreams. And we know that dreams don't follow a linear logic. There's more of an emotional logic to it. The difference between psychedelics and dreaming is a lot of times if you have like a scary dream, like you're about to die or something's about to happen bad, you can just wake up. But in psychedelics, you can't wake up. You have to work through the emotions. You have to accept them. But it's a non-linear kind of consciousness that I think we can all relate to. Now, why would something like that be therapeutic? Well, Freud started out writing The Interpretation of Dreams was one of his early works. And so I think if people just ponder how many times have you had a dream that's been important to you, or a dream that at least brought powerful feelings to the surface or new ideas. I grew up, or I went to college, I would say, down in Florida, in Sarasota, Florida. And it was not that far from Thomas Edison's workspace in Fort Myers. And so they've made that into a museum. And so where you go to see Thomas Edison's his office and his desk, he has a bed right next to it. The lab was in back, and he had all these people working in the back, but he would take naps during the day to try to get inspirations from his dreams about different things that he was trying to invent. So dreams are where things bubble up from the subconscious, the unconscious, different things that we're trying to work on during the day. Some people think, like they think about psychedelics, it's hallucinations, it's completely unreal, it's completely fake, it's all delusion, there's nothing to it. But I don't think that's the case, either with dreams or with psychedelics. And most people who work with psychedelics no longer use the word hallucinogen. But I like to refer to dreams as a way that people can have a touchstone to helping to really understand it. And then there's different kinds of psychedelics. They all have their different effects. So I've used the definition of psychedelic, which was mind manifesting. And in an attempt to normalize psychedelics, I've broadened the definition to include catalysts that don't necessarily have to do with drugs. So one of the best ones is hyperventilation. Now that does change the chemistry in your brain. So it does involve drugs in a way, but it's not an external catalyst. It's an internal catalyst. Meditation can be psychedelic. MDMA, which is not a classic psychedelic. I include in the broad definition, just to help people think that there's it's not such a completely different realm of processing that we're completely unfamiliar with, and hopefully comparing it to dreams or to hyperventilation or to fasting or a certain kind of other meditative techniques or things that people can relate to it more.
Do you personally have a favorite psychedelic?
Well, do I have a favorite psychedelic? It's all context determined. So I actually did an interview earlier today with Rolling Stone, and it was about the conference that they had, and but it's for therapists mostly, this article. And so one of the questions was, what would I really the main message or so that I would give to therapists, which is that you really need to think about the context more than the substance, so that you can take psychedelics in different contexts and you can have widely different effects. We have a program where we have gotten FDA approval for protocols to give MDMA to therapists as part of their training. And some of them had taken MDMA, ecstasy in party settings, and then they took it in a therapy setting, and they said it was like a different drug. So the setting. So as far as what is my favorite, I would say that if I were a sailor, shipwrecked sailor, and crawled up on a deserted island, and I was there all by myself, and I could only have one drug, it would be LSD. And the reason is that LSD is very powerful, and the successful way to work with it is to sort of surrender to the experience. With mescaline, with mushrooms, with MDMA, more so, there's a little bit of negotiating. The classic psychedelics are pretty insistent in a way, but I would say that LSD is insistent in the sense that you might learn things that you didn't want to know. So that I think that would be my most reliable. Now, if it happened to be that my wife and I were stranded on a deserted island and we could only have one drug, I'd want it to be MDMA, because that's more for relationships. We're actually talking about starting a study of MDMA for couples therapy. However, there's other psychedelics, both DMT, which comes from one of the components of ayahuasca, and then 5-methoxy-DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, which is the venom of a frog that's incredibly rapid dissolving of your sense of self within just seconds, but then it's short acting, 15, 20 minutes, something like that, unless you keep redosing. And so there's some very interesting projects that are looking at 5-MeO or DMT for depression. So in a therapeutic context, it'll depend what's the condition that you're treating, all of that. And I've had a chance over the course of a lifetime to see that different psychedelics played an important role at different times. One of my most important psychedelic experiences ever was 1985 with Ibogaine and an LSD Ibogaine combination. So yeah, I'd say it's not really possible to answer your question, which is my favorite psychedelic, without talking about the different kind of contexts.
I have to say, like the therapeutic effect of DMT for me is always like, I don't know, I've seen some of my friends, in the past, like when I was younger, like friends like kind of self-medicating with DMT. And I kind of found that it seems like they're just, they're kind of just seeing all these crazy monsters basically, or whatever, these crazy visions. And there's nothing like, it's not the Freudian therapy type thing. It's more like, I saw all these crazy things, and it kind of, it's a little bit like the experience of noticing that you're in the universe and you're this tiny little thing. And, it's like the universe, I forget what it's called, but there's like a technical term for this, but the realization that you're a dust mote on a dust mote, in a tiny thing, it's a part of this infinite universe. It's a little bit of that thing where they're just like terrified into realizing that their problems are very small. You know what I mean? Like they see all these things and then they kind of like, all right, maybe whatever I'm experiencing is actually in the context of what I just saw is not as much, I'm not as like tied into it. But I was always surprised, having tried it once, I was always surprised there's any therapeutic value in it at all. But then I've seen people get it, so it's
Well,
interesting.
I'll just say that recently the underground is often years and years ahead of where the research is. So what's been developing is vape pens with 5-methoxy DMT with low, medium, and high concentrations of it. And so about 2 years ago, I did a therapy session with 5-MeO DMT, and I was very much looking forward to. I'd done 5-MeO DMT before from a pipe, but this time I was very much looking forward to sort of having this ego dissolving, be part of the big universe experience. But I started with low dose a couple times, and your ego stays intact. You get a sense of how you're starting to move out of your normal processing, but you don't actually do that. Then in this medium dose, I went immediately without any forethought to a trauma from 40 years before that I hadn't fully processed. But I was doing it with therapists in a therapeutic setting. And so we ended up spending the next couple hours sort of talking about that experience. There's also something that we call spiritual bypassing. Felt that if I would have gone to the higher dose, which would have blasted me past my biography, past this incident, then that I would have not dealt with this trauma that I hadn't fully processed before. So in that way, I think 5-MeO and DMT can be very therapeutic if it's encased in a therapeutic situation with integration. So when your friends talk about the things that they saw, a therapist would be more about what was the feeling that you got from them. How did that make you feel? What did it remind you of? What issues are you're trying to say now that you're just a little speck of dust in a big universe, so now you don't feel that your problems are as big. But at the same time, we live in this body. We live in this bounded by birth and death. And the problems that we have in this life really do matter. So it's not that, but you can put it in perspective. So I think the part about the therapeutic use of psychedelics depends mostly on the preparation and the integration and the support that you have during it. But during it, the psychedelic kind of releases this inner healing process of things coming to the surface. And then the therapist with the integration process helps to make sense of it and to bring it back. So we're looking for, long-term change. But a lot of people focus on the unusual things that they saw or felt during the experience, and not so much what you bring back from it in order to improve your baseline.
What sparked your initial interest in psychedelics? I saw your thesis was on cannabis regulation and psychedelics. What got you into that?
Yeah. Well, what got me into it was reading a book when I was 18 years old. This is 1972. And this book was Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research by Stan Grof. And Stan Grof is now 94. Earlier today, I was just reviewing some communications, emails back and forth with Brigitte, his wife, about something new that Stan has written. But by the time that I read Stan's work, the research was being shut down. He was at Johns Hopkins. He was MD, PhD. And I had been drawn to psychedelics before Stan. So what really got me there was being born in 1953 and being Jewish, and my parents educating me on stories of the Holocaust. I've also had relatives in Palestine since 1904. So my great-great-grandmother moved from Russia to America in 1880, and then in 1904 moved to Palestine in order to die and be buried on the Mount of Olives, which is, for those Orthodox Jews, the Messiah is supposed to leave one of the gates of Jerusalem, and then right outside there is the Mount of Olives, and that's where people get resurrected first. It's kind of a prime real estate for being buried. But I think it was the cruelty of humans, of what humans can do to each other, how we can dehumanize others, how the banality of evil, Hannah Arendt talked about it, was just that I was just appalled at humanity. And and just trying to cope with that as a really young boy. But then, not long after that, 62, Cuban Missile Crisis. And so at this point, I'm almost 9 years old, but in school, they teach you to duck and cover. If there's a nuclear war, just go under your desk. You might survive. It's like a little bit of active shooting drills, but it's worse than active shooting drills in a sense, because it's about like the whole world going up in flames.
Right. Your family, everything you love.
Everything. And so that was just terrifying. So I just was aware that from my family that you could have all the safety, you could have all the money, but you could still die because of human hatreds and so I just sort of gravitated more and more towards how what seemed to me was that we have developed our minds incredibly. We were just talking about quantum computing and quantum this and quantum that. And so we have brilliant minds and we have extraordinary technologies, but we have really not developed much in our emotions and our spirituality. So I was sort of forming a lot of these thoughts as the space effort with Kennedy trying to go to the moon. So I'm seeing, people in general thinking in a more cosmic way, in a more hopeful way. And then was Vietnam War. And so I was in one of the last years of the lottery. So I had to confront, now it wasn't Nazis and the Germans, it wasn't the Russians, now it was my own country doing things. And it just felt like people are crazy. And that E.O. Wilson had this great quote that you probably know, that the real problem with humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions with medieval institutions with godlike technologies. So and I also was so lucky in that my family had done well in business and that my parents were saying that they wanted to help their children. I was the oldest of four, figure out what we wanted to do and help us do that. And so I just started thinking, what am I going to do with my life? How do I kind of address this mismatch between our intellectual capabilities? Albert Einstein had this quote about how the splitting of the atom has changed everything except our mode of thinking, and hence we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe, which shall be required if mankind is to survive as a whole new mode of thinking. So what is this new mode of thinking? So as I'm pondering these ideas was the whole counterculture and the use of psychedelics and the anti-war movement. And so I developed this idea that I would try nonviolent resistance to the Vietnam War. And so I studied Gandhi and Emerson and Thoreau and Tolstoy and a lot of nonviolent resistance theorists. And so I decided that I would serve my country by going to jail, that I would not register for the draft. As you were a young man, you had to send in a postcard to register for the draft. So I had a passport, I had a driver's license, I had a social security number, I was paying taxes, I was in high school, I was in every list that I could think of that the government would have about me. So I assumed you don't send in this postcard, which is a crime, that they come and they arrest you and they put you in jail. And so my parents were saying, they understood what I was doing, but they said, you're going to have to pay a bigger price than you realize, because once you're a felon, you're not going to be able to be a licensed doctor. My dad was a doctor or lawyer. So all of those things were prices that I decided I was willing to pay. So I didn't know what kind of career I would have. So this was my strategy. And then I was starting to hear about psychedelics as a way for you to go beyond your sense of ego, to go beyond how you identify yourself, to feel how we're all connected. And I was very interested in the political implications of the mystical experience. And so I started exploring psychedelics. But then the backlash came against psychedelics, or it came before I really started exploring psychedelics. And so everything was criminalized. And I had this idea, though, that the world was in a desperate shape and that I needed to elevate my consciousness as much as I could. And I needed to do it as quickly as I could And I made the mistake to think, just take as many drugs as you want. So I gave it a good try. And I ended up super confused, but I was losing more and more interest in my studies. I actually had a professor who had studied directly with Jung, and I was taking her class, but it felt like my unconscious, my emergence was so raw, I couldn't even really sit in this class by this woman who had studied directly with Jung. I just was too raw. And so I went to this guidance counselor at college. It was a private school, very experimental school in Sarasota, Florida, called New College. It's the canary in the mine, by the way, for the Republicans going after education. So DeSantis tried to kill it because it became state school, and it was the Honors College of Florida. So before Trump went after Columbia, and before he went after Harvard and stuff, DeSantis went after New College. But in any case, I was there at this school, go to the guidance counselor, and he took me seriously. And he said, here's this book to read. And it was this book, LSD, Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research. So reading that book woke me up really to the incredible research that's been done with psychedelics in treating alcoholism, heroin addiction, fear of death, all sorts of implications, and studying the mystical experience. And what was in that book was a scientific overlay of the kind of experiences we had. So I didn't particularly trust religion, which is freighted with so much kind of superstition or miracle stories or dogma, but I trusted science. So it was science looking at all of this kind of profound kind of experiences you could have that in my mind also had political implications. But wrapped within all of it was the most important thing of all, which was a reality test, which was therapy. Can you actually help people use these experiences to become happier, less depressed, less fearful of death, all of that? And I asked if I could reach out to Stan, because the amazing thing was the book was published in 1975, Stan's first book.
Mhm.
This was 1972. My guidance counselor had a direct copy, a manuscript copy from Stan. I have like the most incredible luck of getting this particular guidance counselor, and also the good fortune to be communicating with Stan this morning after all these years. But it was after the backlash had wiped down research. He was getting ready to leave Hopkins, and I'm this confused 18-year-old, and I think he was 44, and he was MD PhD, and he wrote me back, and he said, yes, here's a path. Here's how I suggest you consider becoming a psychedelic therapist, because I didn't need a license. I thought, okay, I'll be an underground psychedelic therapist. I'm going to be arrested for not registering for the draft. I'm going to have all this felony record, but I'll be able to be an underground psychedelic. So that's sort of how it all came, out of this desperation for avoiding humans killing each other by realizing how we're all interconnected, and also working through our sort of frameworks from the past, trauma stories through which we see the future. So that's sort of how I got into it. And I was so committed to it that a few years after that, I had the most important dream of my life. So since we started talking about dreams, and this was a dream of a Holocaust survivor saying that he was almost killed, but he miraculously survived. And he wasn't sure why, but he knew he survived for a purpose, but he wasn't sure what the purpose was. And so in this dream, he ends up showing me what happened to him. And then we're on his deathbed. And then he says, now I know what my purpose is. My purpose is to tell you to study psychedelics and to bring back psychedelic research, and this hope that we'll see how we're all interconnected. So then he died in front of my eyes, and, I woke up. So I think what's been driving me this whole time, last year, April 8th was our 38th anniversary, April 8th, 2024, and it was the full solar eclipse through the United States. So we had a big gathering together outside of Austin with other people, this enormous festival. We had a big section, maps and speeches and things like that. And so the way I've kind of understood myself was through the moment of totality. So you see this darkness covering the sun, and there's this rim of kind of firelight around it, beautiful, that you can watch with your eyes, because it's muted enough. So I felt that that's a good description of me, that the heart of darkness, the horror of humanity, what we can do for each other, has been driving me. But because I've been wrapped in privilege, which is this beautiful sunlight around it, I've been able to harness fear as an engine of motivation rather than as some overwhelming thing that just keeps me from feeling happy or being depressed. So I think it's this, for me, this perfect combination of horror of what humans can do, surrounded by this privilege, and also the knowledge of also our positive capabilities. We can find our way out of this situation potentially, but right now we're committing national suicide in a lot of ways in terms of going after science, going after climate change, promoting oil, isolating ourselves from the world, all different ways. So it looks pretty grim right now, I would say. But the hope is that
It's not Cuban Missile Crisis level, though. I have to say, like the millennial version of, the millennial version of like scary times is not that bad.
well, that's a good comparison. Yeah.
Like if you gotta, if you ground it, it's actually pretty relaxing.
Well, it's sort of slow motion. Yeah. Whereas you could go up in an instant. Yeah. If there was nuclear war.
You know what? I have a question that I think, I think young people tend to, like you mentioned, you were thinking about all this, as an 18-year-old, and I think young people tend to come up with like these grandiose like solutions, right?
Yeah.
And I think having worked on this now for 40 years or more, right, at this point, what do you think? I mean, if on a personal level, it's clear that psychedelics increase, people's ability to connect to themselves, the world, other people, and so on. But somehow, like, because there have been cultures for thousands of years that use psychedelics, the Greeks had psychedelics, etc.
Yeah.
Why haven't we really seen an example of them, preventing war? Right? Like, what do you think? Because if you look at the historical record, it's not obvious that there's an impact, or maybe it is in your perspective. But like, I'm curious what you think of that.
Well, I think that war happens either because aggressors come after you or because you need to defend yourself. So there's an incredible book by Aldous Huxley called Island. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
Have you heard of it? So this was the last book that Aldous wrote before he died. And Island is this idyllic society, psychedelics woven through it for rites of passage for when kids are 12 or 13. And it's sort of a psychedelic culture, his sort of utopian psychedelic culture. And it's off on this island. But the book ends with the island being destroyed by the oil companies. So it's like the Avatar movies, Yeah. So I think that for psychedelics really to prevent war, it needs to be all the cultures, so that because if and enough of those people. So I guess I'll share this other experience I had with 2 days in a row. This is now also back in 1985, and this was the first day was DMT, and the second day was ketamine, and with a bunch of therapists. So the first day was DMT, and a bunch of us sitting in a circle. These are all therapists and researchers and all. And so during the DMT experience, I had this sense of being blasted beyond my sense of self and part of this enormous universe, and I had this feeling of evolution and billions and billions of years, and then I'm a part of everything, and everything is part of me, and this is glorious, wonderful thing. And then I have this thought. It's like reality check. The thought is, if you're part of everything and everything is part of you, then Hitler is part of you too. It's not that he's out there. And that was just this shocking kind of a thing. And it took me a whole day of just being sobered up and quiet and thinking about what that really meant to say that that's part of all of us, that potential. Not necessarily what we actualize, but that's our potential. Jung has said that we need to study psychology because we know far too little of humans. And he said we are our own, the only natural enemy that we have now is humans. And he said we are the source of all coming evil.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was Jung just a few years before he died. So I have this sense of, okay, we've got this potential for evil in us. And I kind of accepted that. Then the next day was ketamine. And so during this experience of ketamine, I'm hovering above and behind Hitler as he's giving one of these speeches,
Okay.
like the Nuremberg, just masses of Germans. And I just got really, really scared. And I'm thinking, how do I get into his head? How do I make it so that, he doesn't want to kill people. He doesn't want to be a war leader. And I felt that if I couldn't overcome my fear of looking at him in this moment, that I'd never be able to come to an answer. And luckily with ketamine, I remembered, okay, you can breathe. So I just started breathing, and that helped me control the fear. And then I was able to get back and look more closely. And what was happening was that I saw this Heil Hitler salute. Not that different from what Elon
Roman
Musk did.
salute.
But it was like the one pushing the energy out to the many. And then they would do the Heil Hitler salute back to him. Then he would do it back to them. And it would be like this sing-song kind of thing. But it was like this vibration connection that kept getting higher and higher and higher. And Hitler was a master of helping people feel part of something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
But it was through this. And then I finally realized that there was no way for me to get inside Hitler's head, that he was getting too much out of it. But it was the people that really were giving away their power was where the solution could be. So what that means is both mainstreaming psychedelics, drug policy reform. So you need a spiritualized humanity. You need mass mental health. So it goes beyond just having, quote, enlightened leaders. There'll always be despots that will manipulate people on the basis of fears and anxieties and hating others and scapegoating. So I guess to your question, why haven't we had a psychedelic informed culture that ended war? But let's go talk about, in a sense, democracy is another way to handle conflict without war.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal of democracy, is how do we handle conflict? And democracy began by the Greeks in a psychedelically infused culture with the Eleusinian mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted for 2,000 years. It was so important, this kind of experience that you would have of
The Eleusinian Mysteries are had a 2,000 year.
from 1600 BC, and it was ended around 396.
Oh, okay.
And it was ended by the Catholic Church. And churches are both supposedly about spirituality and good work, but they're also about power. And one of the ways that churches keep power is become the intermediary between you and your own spirituality. So this kind of direct experience that you get from drinking this potion called Kikion, that you were
And this was like an ergot LSD. Like,
yeah.
has anyone ever reproduced this in the modern day and drank it? Like, do we have the recipe?
No, the recipe is lost. You were forbidden under pain of death to say what happened.
Okay.
So
Wow.
modern scholars have come to this because it's focused on barley and wheat and rye, and ergot grows on rye, and you can get precursors for LSD from that. So there is a lot of effort to try to find that. But I would say that the Greeks felt that this kind of experience was so important that they were willing to let women and slaves participate. It wasn't just the men. Even slaves could participate in these mysteries. And so out of that psychedelic culture came democracy and early philosophy. What happened after the Catholic Church wiped out the Eleusinian mysteries is this continued power struggle against direct experience. So you have all the burning of the witches in the Middle Ages. The witches were often ones that women worked with plant medicines, sometimes psychedelics, sometimes not. When the conquistadors come to the New World, the first people they felt that they needed to kill were the shamans, because they were the heart of the cultures a lot of times. And so, they criminalized peyote and mushrooms, and those give you visions of the devil, things like that. So I would say that we haven't really had a chance as humanity to have this kind of widespread psychedelic experience that you can get in other ways than just psychedelics, but this sense of we're all in it together. And so I think now, in the midst of the darkness that we're facing, there's a lot of hope because, the upside of COVID, well, we're all interconnected. You can have a virus from halfway across the world, but it can come here. Global warming is not something that you can have a town, Belmont, pass a law. It's a global problem. Yeah. Nuclear weapons are a global problem. So I think more and more we're realizing that we need to think globally. And I'd say the big consciousness shift that will hopefully prevent war one day is this shift that many people understand in psychology courses in high school or college. You study Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs.
Self-actualization.
Yeah. So that's what you just said. So self-actualization is what people are taught in schools. That it's your survival needs, your belonging needs, your self-esteem needs, and then eventually self-actualization. You become your full self. What people don't know, and this is what's been disturbing to me, is that in the last few years of his life, Maslow changed the hierarchy of needs in confrontation with Stan Grof and LSD research and others. So Maslow started humanistic psychology, but he also started what he called transpersonal psychology. So transpersonal is beyond the person. So it's confrontation with death, with birth, with meaning and purpose, things like that. And so in the last few years of his life, Maslow changed it. So there's something above self-actualization, which is self-transcendence, meaning to realize that while we are a self bounded within life, birth, and death, we are part of something much, much bigger, and we need to transcend ourselves. It doesn't mean ignoring your sense of self, but think in a more like we're an ant in an anthill kind of a thing. And it's both about every individual ant, but it's also about the anthill. And so that's kind of a spiritual shift. And so I think when we've talked briefly, I'll just say about Elon Musk and going to Mars, that there's a way in which that's an attempt to think in a cosmic spiritual way. But it's also running away from the idea that we bring our consciousness wherever it travels with us. And so it's not a solution to go to Mars. It's a running away from real problems to go to Mars. As the thought of, that's what everything needs to be done for. And I can, really do horrible things because I'm saving humanity by going to Mars. So I think that it's a way to think spiritually, to think cosmically, but it's still thinking incredibly selfishly and small-mindedly in many ways. So it's almost like spiritual bypassing. So I think that we, as a humanity as a whole, we really need to move to kind of a new general kind of understanding. I had an incredible opportunity to meet the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, a fellow named Robert Mueller. And in 1983, he wrote this book called New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. And this book was about how the UN was created for conflicts between countries, but really a lot of those conflicts were religious-based conflicts. And we needed a global spirituality, which is not one world religion. But it's more like the Sufis or the Baha'is, these mystical religions where it's not like this prophet is the real prophet, this prophet is not. It's not like there's one right way, but it's this sense that we're part of this bigger picture. And on the cover of his book was the picture of the Earth from space. So there is this idea here of sort of the political implications of this mystical experience. And so at the time, psychedelic research was shut down in 1983 when I read his book. He didn't say anything about psychedelics. So I wrote to him a letter and I said, would you help bring back psychedelic research? It will help us study this global spirituality. And again, like Stan Groff, this was now 11 years later than I wrote to Stan, he wrote me back also. That started a whole process. So I think humanity needs to do this kind of consciousness shift as a whole. And one of the things I've talked about, we may know, your listeners may know about Bhutan has created a measure called gross national happiness. And that's a way other than gross national product, which is just about economic activity.
Sure.
This is about gross national happiness. And it's interesting. They've got a lot of attention for that, and they've used it in different countries. I think Finland is often one of the most happiest country, I think, because of the social safety net and things. But I think we need a gross national trauma measure that we can apply to the different countries all over the world. And then over the next 50 years, can we reduce the burden of trauma, both what you experience and also multi-intergenerational trauma through epigenetic transmission of trauma settings? There's a researcher, Rachel Yehuda at the Bronx VA, that has done work on Holocaust survivors and their children and identified epigenetic mechanisms by which sort of set points for fear, anxiety.
But do we know
depression.
that that's safe to have no trauma? Because I don't know if we've ever tried that.
Well,
you know what I mean? Just like we've never had no trauma, a society with people with no trauma.
Okay, so you point out a difficulty. So for me, net zero trauma doesn't mean no trauma.
Okay.
So net zero carbon doesn't mean no carbon. It means that we're just not adding to the burden of trauma already. So I think you're totally right. There's always going to be death. There's always going to be accidents. There's always going to be trauma. We learn from trauma. We're not trying to eliminate trauma completely, but the same way that we're trying to eliminate as much as we can disease from cancer, we're not necessarily part of this. So doctors who try to eliminate disease are not necessarily part of, oh, let's eliminate death and live forever. But just this idea, it's sort of a modest, in some ways, goal of net zero trauma. It's just saying over there. I often say this, there's an estimate that many people think are reliable of about 1 billion climate refugees by 2050 if we don't change the direction, which it doesn't look like we're doing. So it seems like there's going to be increasing amounts of trauma. We all know that there's increasing amounts of depression, anxiety. A lot of young people don't want to have kids because they're so worried about the world. So I think that the trauma burden on humanity as a whole is going to be increasing. And if we can just treat trauma and slow things down and just not add to the burden of trauma, then we can start talking about net negative trauma. But yeah, we'll never eliminate trauma, nor would we want to.
In many ways, I agree with you, but I'm like very tempted to play devil's advocate.
Please do.
I just wonder, maybe people were just, maybe we've, rather than having trauma increase, I wonder if we've actually just lost some of the muscle of how to handle it as a society and how to help people around us handle it. Because if you look at, if you read the biography of Benjamin Franklin, people's wives would just die in childbirth continuously. I mean, if you look at just what life was like,
yes,
it was very traumatic. It was typical to lose your children. And these people were not depressed, traumatized. They might have been, but they were also the founding fathers of America. They were, every day had to go collect buckets of water and bring them back to the house just so they could, wash their face, right? So they were very active people. They weren't, you don't see, at least maybe this stuff isn't recorded as well, because there wasn't just, now we have Instagram, so every moment is recorded, but maybe we've lost some of the ability to handle it more so than and process it more so than the actual, number going up.
I think that's true. I mean, my dad was a pediatrician. And so when I was growing up in the 1950s and early 1960s, really, we tried to remove ourselves from nature in a way. So people didn't talk about death. My aunt was a twin, and one of the twins died when I was 4 years old from cancer. She was 21 years old. So but you didn't talk. Nobody told her she had cancer. You're not supposed to talk about cancer. Women were tranquilized to give birth. Men were not allowed in the delivery room. So we were trying to take birth out of sort of normal experience. We're trying to take death. Nobody talked about death. Now we have thousands of hospice centers, we have birthing centers. So I think you're right. There was this effort at the rawness of what happened during World War II, and the rawness of the extent of the war and devastation and trauma, that people tried to eliminate it wherever we could.
Hmm.
And I think this ability to try to process trauma is what we're trying to restore with psychedelic therapy and other kinds of therapy. So I think you're being a devil's advocate is a good thing. Do it as much as you like. And I think that we've been shielded too much too. So here's one of the things, as long as we've had a bunch of political points, which is that the destruction of science in America, the effort to go after academia, the elimination of foreign aid, the things that we're doing to push away international students, all these things are going to be really damaging to America in this sort of slow way. But most people don't read the news that much. They listen to certain kind of media, but it takes people getting directly hurt before they start questioning.
Mm-hmm.
So what we see about empires is that one of the things that really, I wouldn't say uniformly, but often destroys empires is overreach.
Mm-hmm.
So that was America going to Vietnam, America going to Iraq. But we also now have the Republicans going after Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and that's going to impact people directly. And so there's some hope that we may turn around to thinking more long-term potentially, but I think it's only going to be for people getting directly hurt. And this idea of empathy. So you're saying, yes, people used to have women died in childbirth all the time, and kids died in infancy, and they didn't have as much treatment for diseases and all of that. But now they didn't have mass media either.
Mm-hmm.
So now people are so aware what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in South Sudan,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in Ukraine. You know, so what's going on with climate change?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm here in, we're here now in Massachusetts. Well, there's just floods in Texas that wiped away a bunch of young children at their summer camp. So we're exposed to that. So in some ways, we're exposed in a secondary way, not as much a direct way, to even more trauma than people were exposed to before. And we get overwhelmed. That's where people narrow their sight just to the present or just to what they see. So we just have to do our best, I think. My TED Talk that I gave in 2019, so the first main stage TED Talk on psychedelics, I ended up by saying it's a race, humanity is in a race between consciousness and catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and psychedelics are here to help consciousness prevail. So I think it is it's a rise of mass extinction right now too, as much as the times of the dinosaurs and others. We're just seeing. I mean, this is just a small thing, but I remember as a child going over to my grandparents' house and catching fireflies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, when is the last time you even saw a firefly? You know, insects have been tremendously decimated.
I think, okay, so I got to keep disagreeing with you. So basically,
Good.
Don't you think, like, the things that you have direct experience with, which is like the world of like psychedelic advocacy and research,
Yeah.
that's actually in many ways been an enormous success, right?
Yeah.
And you know, when you started out, it was, I mean, for sure you weren't part of academia, right? In any meaningful way.
Yeah.
Everything was stacked against you.
Yeah.
And it's actually all in all, like, you've had a lot of struggles, but it's went very well, right?
Yes.
And you can for sure feel optimistic about that, right?
Yeah.
But then all these other issues where you're exposed to them more secondhand, like wars, like climate change, all these things.
Yeah.
I feel like people struggle to have as much hope about those things because they're less exposed to the solutions that are not yet, you know, if you ask somebody, you know, who wasn't involved in psychedelic advocacy in 1999, what's going on with psychedelics? It's the end of the world. They're never gonna, it's been decades. They've banned everything. We've got no hope, you know, this kind of thing. But actually that was the turning point, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like, do you feel like maybe there's this kind of tendency to, bad news travels fast, right? And good news is always uncertain. Like, is it really happening? And all these things. Like, do you think there's a tendency to do that as an expert, where like the thing about, you have a lot more optimism, and then it's like, these other things look like they're not going so well,
Yeah, I think it's true. I think we all do know about the ugly selfishness at the heart of the Republican Party right now. So, and also around the world, these kind of right-wing parties are coming up. So there is some hope. So what you're saying is that for areas that we're not aware of, let's say quantum computing, or the way in which science can
even
proceed.
Climate change. I think if you take climate change, I think there's a lot of the solutions are exponential. So meaning like it's happening, but you're in the part of the curve where you don't notice. So a simple example is,
that's right.
I used to work in like clean tech, whatever you call it, 10, 15 years ago, and people would laugh about solar. It's like this thing.
Yeah.
I had a professor in college who is actually a brilliant guy. He was an ecologist, but he did a lot of these like energy return on investment calculations because in ecology, that's very important. And he had come up with this whole theory that solar panels required so much energy to produce that they were like a total bust, And now there is absolutely exponential growth in solar, like off the charts. Like I think China is going to add, in 2030, they're going to add enough solar to equal our entire like electricity consumption of the US or something in 1 year. They're going to add that much solar capacity. I'm pretty sure that's the number.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's still not front page news, I would say. Like how many people really know about that?
Well, and also US is destroying its incentives for solar. So we're turning, but I would say that, give you an example. Our middle child, named Lila, has a job working for TED. And she works for the TED Audacious program, which is their philanthropy arm. So I don't know this for sure, but I think my daughter is less depressed about the state of the world than a lot of her friends, because she's constantly seeing new ideas, as you're saying, new ways to be helpful in all sorts of different areas. So I think if people were really exposed to a lot of the promise, of course, as you say, I think the exponential curve idea makes a lot of sense. You spend decades and decades, making very little progress, but then you reach kind of a turning point, and then it starts to move at much faster rates.
It's the same for large language models. Like all of us, it seemed like they just appeared all of a sudden, ChatGPT and so forth.
Yeah.
It's very slow growth for a long time.
Yeah, and I would say that Sam Altman himself is sympathetic with psychedelics. He wanted MAPS to be part of the Y Combinator.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And then he left, and then the people that took over from him said, no way, we're not going to do it.
He graduated from Y Combinator.
Oh, you did?
Went through it in 2020. I do think a lot of those, a lot of the...
Was it helpful, just by the way?
Very helpful, yeah. I'd for sure recommend it. It's like that people often ask, but it's surprising that given the data, like they just have great data, the results are so good now that they've been around for so long. They just have a great track record. But I'm sure they would have, I mean, this is an interesting question, this amazing counterfactual. If Sam had stayed at YC and they had admitted MAPS, would MDMA therapy already be legalized, because they could have, like, the big thing that they do, what they're actually good at, is forcing people to like make hard decisions and like push them towards like something that's going to work, so maybe there was like one little detail, that they could have pushed over the line. It's just a funny counterfactual. It's a very funny counterfactual.
They might have, I would say, to explore that a little bit further, they might have given, so there was MAPS, and then there was the MAPS Public Benefit Corp, which is our
Lycos?
Well, it became MAPS Public Benefit Corp has become Lycos. I finally felt they wanted to become a different thing. I finally felt they didn't deserve the name MAPS Public Benefit Corp because they were not really acting out of public benefit. So then I said, go ahead and change the name. I'm not going to object. And they changed it to Lycos. But Sam wanted both MAPS and the MAPS Public Benefit Corp and the leaders of each of them to go through the Y Combinator.
Right.
And I think what maybe could have happened is that where we lost the thread was it became around 2000, around the time that you were doing this, was that
2020, you mean?
Well, yeah, 2020. Sorry, around 2020 was where the rise of the for-profit psychedelic companies, and it became difficult for us to raise money because, as from donors, people wanted to invest, and also Amy Emerson, who was head of the MAPS Public Benefit Corp, and he was head of MAPS. our expertise was drug development, was not commercialization. So where things sort of started going downhill was when we felt that we didn't really know commercialization.
Mm-hmm.
And then different advisors said, oh, you need to bring in traditional pharma people and you need to spend this whole amount of money and you need to do it in the traditional way. And when you're doing something innovative, if your leaders try to do it in a traditional way, they don't educate the public, they don't educate the regulators.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if we had gone through Y Combinator, Amy and I would have felt comfortable to say, hey, we'll muddle through commercialization. We don't need these experts and we don't need to sell the company to investors, and let's just do it in a small way. So yeah, maybe that could have, but we'll never know.
How did you originally decide? I think this was one of the big decisions that probably affected things for decades. How did you decide to work on MDMA as like the wedge drug versus mushrooms, whatever it might be?
Okay, that's a great question. So 1972 is when I, read Stan Grof's Realms of the Human Unconscious, decided to focus my life on psychedelics, and I had no idea of this drug called MDA, which was a version popular in the 60s, similar to MDMA. I didn't know about it. And then also I did a lot of mescaline and a lot of peyote extract and a lot of psilocybin and classic psychedelics. It wasn't until 1982. So I dropped out of school for 10 years and to build myself up, to get grounded. I knew I was going to go back to school. I knew I was going to study psychedelics. It was the center of my focus for my life, but it took me 10 years to kind of get ready. So I go back to school, and the first thing I do is go to Esalen and study with Stan Grof. And it's the September of 1982. That's when I just learned about MDMA. And what I learned about MDMA was that it was both a therapy drug that had sort of revitalized the psychedelic underground, in part because it was legal, but also in part because of the way it worked. But it was also becoming more and more of a party drug under the name ecstasy. So it was clear to me that it was going to be criminalized, and it was clear to everybody else. It would eventually, this was Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan, just say no. So I started a nonprofit connected to Buckminster Fuller before MAPS to gather resources to try to respond to sue the DEA once they moved to criminalize MDMA. So
what's the connection to Buckminster? That's the buckyball carbon 60.
Yes.
What's the connection there?
Well, Buckminster Fuller had the geodesic dome. He started global thinking very early on. He had what's called the world game. They would talk about like water or energy or pollution or different kind of things on a global scale. So he had you talked about solar energy. So he was very interested in renewable energy. So in Sarasota, where I was, this friend of mine had this nonprofit called Earth Metabolic Design Lab. And that was founded by Buckminster Fuller. So this was sort of a local version on alternative energy. And by the end of the 70s and early 80s, despite the hope of solar and Jimmy Carter promoting it, you get in Reagan and you get it all wiped out. And so my friend had this nonprofit that he wasn't using. His name was John Lambie. And I said, could I take over this nonprofit that you've got? And it's about alternative energy. I can reform it to be about alternative psychedelic energy, alternative matter energy. So that's why it was just kind of a global world game kind of thinking. But then there had to be a strategic analysis. So we won the case, but DEA kept MDMA illegal. So then I started MAPS in 86. So the question is, I want to make psychedelics into medicines. That's the only way through the culture. Everything else is criminalized. People respect science. You get free. So here's what we're doing today. You do scientific research in a way, you get earned media that you don't have to pay for, of all different kinds, to make up for the billions of dollars of anti-drug propaganda. All right. So then I had to make a decision. What psychedelic and what clinical condition is likely to go through the system first? So MDMA was the drug. And the reason I chose MDMA more than LSD or psilocybin or something else, even though there was a lot more research with LSD and psilocybin, is because MDMA is the most gentle of all the psychedelics. It's the least disruptive of your sense of self. In fact, it can enhance your sense of self. It's the easiest to integrate. It is directly impacting the fear centers of the brain, which we didn't know quite then because brain scans hadn't really developed in such a way. But that it was, the other part is that when we talk about therapists, I've talked about the context that really matters. And therapists who are going to work with their patients with psychedelics will be more effective than they would be otherwise if they've done the drug they're giving to patients. So, you wouldn't take scuba diving lessons from somebody that's never scuba dived, or airplane flying lessons from somebody that's never flown a plane, things like that. And you'd never go to an ayahuasca shaman that's never done ayahuasca. So the part of our story of how we train therapists with their own self-experience, in general, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists are more scared of taking LSD or MDMA than they are, or LSD or psilocybin than they are of taking MDMA.
Why so?
Why so? Because there's a part of the LSD or psilocybin where you're dissolving your sense of self. And that requires courage, and that requires you confront fear. You're not processing in a normal way. People think you're going crazy. I mean, I was raised and told that if you take LSD 5 or 6 times, you're certifiably insane. But that's all it took, to be, you're off over the edge, that it's a hallucination, and you do it 5 or 6 times, you're just, so there's more fear of letting go.
Especially back then, probably.
Oh, back then. Well, then also because then the average dose of LSD was 250 micrograms. So it was really major existential crisis, but that's why we were doing it, for these kind of existential crisis, and then see, who am I and where do I fit in? So
I do theoretical physics for that.
What?
I do theoretical physics for that. That has built an existential crisis.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So the other part of it, though, was that there needed to be sympathetic patients.
Yeah.
So that I thought, okay, MDMA is, I think, revitalized the underground psychedelic therapy movement. And it kept doing that even after it was criminalized.
What is that? What was the physical, what did that really look like? Like, what did it mean? What is the underground therapy movement? Like, you could, through friends, find a therapist who would use MDMA, or what did that really mean back then?
Yeah, that pretty much meant that there was, 99% of the people that have ever done psychedelics have done it outside of clinical research.
Of course, yeah.
All right, so back in 1970, when Nixon is passing the Controlled Substances Act and wiping out all the psychedelic research and saying that his 2 main enemies were the civil rights movement and the hippies, and he's going to go after them. A lot of the people that had worked with psychedelics went into meditation and non-drug techniques, but some continued to do work with psychedelics and risked their licenses to do so. So that really became the beginning of the underground psychedelic movement, was researchers who had been locked out of the labs continued to do the work, but also this vast counterculture that people were using psychedelics for spiritual reasons, for personal growth, for inspiration, for listening to music, for going to Grateful Dead concerts, for all of these things, to bond with groups. And so that formed this sort of small community of underground psychedelic therapists. And then at the same time, what is was clear to me again is that you need sympathetic patients for people to care. All right. So the ways psychedelics, and in the 60s, psychedelics had been used for LSD for alcoholism, heroin addiction. But those are the other. Addicts are the other. So, I mean, this is one of the best reasons, but we otherize people that have problems with drugs. So the 2 main ways that psychedelics appeal to everybody is fear of death. So there was some important work with LSD for people with cancer who were undergoing fear of death.
That's something that people can think, like, this could happen to me.
This could happen to me. And then also in America, the way we put veterans on a pedestal. And so when I first started thinking about this, I met in 1982 II, actually, I met a veteran who had been shot in the back in Vietnam. And he talked about how his MDMA experience had helped him resolve the emotions of being shot in the back. And he'd always had pain and was in a lot of pain. But he said once he was able to resolve the emotions of being shot in the back, then the physical pain went way down.
Hmm.
So I saw that MDMA could be really effective for certain veterans from Vietnam. And veterans were sympathetic patients in a way to the American public. And also veterans give you what was critical, which is bipartisan support.
Right.
So it's pretty amazing right now that one of the only things that's not part of the culture war is psychedelics, and how many prominent people in the Trump administration are saying they're pro-psychedelic, which is shocking in a way to think of. So what I felt was that taking MDMA, the most gentle but very profound and deep psychedelic, and using it to treat PTSD. So we needed not just sympathetic patients, but a condition for which untreated can lead to suicide, which there's 150,000 veterans have committed suicide since 9/11, way more than have died in the wars themselves. And something for which the current treatments were helpful for some people, but left a lot of people still needing more. And so that fit MDMA for PTSD. Now, in the early 90s, after the 1985, when everything was criminalized by the DEA and FDA was still blocking research, and there was all this rise of neurotoxicity, the whole idea that one dose of MDMA causes severe brain damage with major functional consequences, such that MDMA should never, ever be researched because we already know it's too dangerous. There was that whole rhetoric funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse and vastly exaggerated science. And so in order to get over this idea of neurotoxicity mattering, the first study that MAPS proposed from 86 to 90, we worked on 5 different protocols for MDMA, all rejected by the FDA. Then what happened is that in 1990, a new group of people took over at the FDA to regulate psychedelics. And the first thing they did is they gave approval to Rick Strassman for a study of DMT. But it was the idea that DMT is the only endogenous psychedelic in your brain, and that too much of it could cause schizophrenia. So the idea was, does DMT link to schizophrenia? So it was kind of a negative thing. It wasn't a therapeutic study.
Right.
So then MAPS worked with Dr. Charlie Grobe, and we proposed MDMA for cancer patients with anxiety, because we felt that cancer patients with anxiety near the end of their lives, that there would be no consequences from MDMA neurotoxicity. And so the FDA called a special advisory committee meeting and had a 2-day meeting of the NIDA-funded animal researchers to decide whether they should resume opening up human research after decades of virtually total suppression. And so the FDA said, yes, they should go ahead and open up the human research. And so they said to us, we're not going to give you permission to work with cancer patients because we're going to treat you like any other pharmaceutical company. All the information that's come from the underground counts for nothing. It only is what we see under direct FDA-approved studies. So we do a phase 1 dose-response safety study. So we did that during the 90s, during which the rave movement built up, the ecstasy, spread around the world, and the neurotoxicity. People were going crazy about how terribly damaging MDMA was. Sort of culminated in 2001 with Oprah showing fake brain scans, claiming that MDMA caused holes in the brain, which was graphically manipulated brain scans. But but near the end of the 90s, Charlie, we got the phase 1 safety study done. And Charlie was thinking he wanted to go work with psilocybin and end of life. He thought it'd be easier because of all the stigma about ecstasy and neurotoxicity and raves and parties. He said people don't even know what psilocybin is.
What exactly is neurotoxicity? Is it neurons dying?
Well, they tried to make it seem that it was neurons dying, cell death, but it was actually in certain high doses, you can get nerve terminal degeneration of the serotonin nerve terminals.
Mhm.
So that's what they claimed then was neurotoxicity. It doesn't appear at the doses that we use in humans, and it's not even clear that it's a negative thing.
Mm.
Now, one of the
You
main
have to not hit the table.
Oh,
This is
okay.
much.
Okay. One of the main transformations in terminology has been from neurotoxicity to neuroplasticity,
Mhm.
but it's basically talking to the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, you reroute the way
But
you
is that
process
rigorously
information.
true? Like this serotonin, like having like changes in the serotonin system, is that really the same as neuroplasticity, or you just mean that like neuroplasticity was ignored and they were focusing on this negative kind of edge case?
I don't even think they really knew about
Right,
neuroplasticity.
right.
Yeah. No, they were just saying that we do this, and there are certain terminals in certain pathways that are reduced,
Damn it.
Hmm.
damaged. Yeah. So it wasn't really cell death. Um, but then we do know that people reroute the way certain memories happen, and that
Hmm.
there's different. Well, we've done fMRI studies, and others people have done fMRI studies to show that there's after successful therapy, which doesn't mean just doing the drug, but after a successful therapy for PTSD, people have less activity in the amygdala. Whereas if you have PTSD, you have increased activity in the amygdala where you process fear. You have reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, so you're not thinking as logically. So triggers, sounds that remind somebody of an explosion, or clothes similar to what somebody was attacked by somebody wearing similar clothes. You get triggered easily. You don't have the logical capacity. And then hippocampus, where we put memories into long-term storage, has lower activity. So this is what happens with PTSD. MDMA does the opposite. It reduces activity in the amygdala, increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, increases activity in the hippocampus and connectivity with the amygdala, and has hormonal release, including oxytocin, which is the hormone of love and connection and nursing mothers, that gives people a sense of safety, connection, self-compassion. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score, which I'll just say amazingly, he wrote it in 2014. And last week, it was the #1 best-selling book on the New York Times list between ebooks and paperback books. It was the #1 in America. It's been on the list for like 260 weeks or something like that. So I think people in general are very much sensitized now to the role of trauma. And Bessel worked as our principal investigator on our phase 3 site and added measures of self-compassion, alexithymia, whether you can feel emotions or not, different things. And he's just published a really important paper in PLOS ONE about how MDMA works in the hardest cases. But where I'm trying to say this is that there are these changes in the way that neural activity is recorded, and that presumably means that there are certain sort of connections that wither away and others that are strengthened. Whether I don't know that they're completely only the serotonin system ones, but there is definite brain changes, and what we now talk about that is neuroplasticity. There's a researcher, Rick Doblin, who is from Johns Hopkins, who is now at UC Berkeley, and she's done work in critical periods. So we know that kids can learn language better than adults. You know, that if you grow up in a multilingual home, you kind of pick up different languages more easily. There's critical periods for eyesight for all sorts of different neural functions. And she's done a series of studies in different animal species and demonstrated that psychedelics open up these critical periods. And the longer you're in the psychedelic state, the longer you're in this critical period. And what that means is you have more opportunity during this integration process to rewire your brain, to take insights that you'd gotten, experiences that you've gotten during a psychedelic state, and then integrate them into your daily practice, into your daily patterns of thinking while these critical periods are open. And so that's what we talk about in terms of neuroplasticity, critical periods. And so we're, back when FDA said we could only work with healthy normals, and then Charlie went off to do work with psilocybin, with end of life, that started the whole work with psilocybin with cancer patients. But then I felt like, okay, now let's get back, because we challenged a lot this neurotoxicity hypothesis, and I felt like it wasn't as strong anymore. So that's where we moved in 1999 and 2000 to do the first MDMA PTSD study. That was before 9/11. That was before Iraq and Afghanistan. So it turned out, though, that the amount of trauma that people realize our veterans have gone through is just incredible. So it turns out that MDMA for PTSD was exactly the right choice for which psychedelic and which patient population would make it through the system. And I like to say that MAPS doesn't do science, we do political science, which means that we have political overlay to the science that we do, because we're looking for political implications of the scientific research in reducing support for the drug war, making psychedelics more legally available, and being able to go through the FDA system. So I'd say the education I got at the Kennedy School in public policy, and it was my shift from learning to treat individuals to learning to treat a culture. So I think what MAPS is doing is psychotherapy for sick public policy. And that's why the science that is the mechanism by which, but it's very carefully chosen science. So that's where I say it's political science.
So do you employ then the clinicians who carry out the studies, or are they loosely affiliated with?
Well, okay,
What
so
is the
now
relation?
we've separated MAPS, the nonprofit, from Lycos, the for-profit pharma company. But MAPS MAPS was created in 1986, and I didn't really create MAPS Public Benefit Corp till 2014. So the first 28 years of MAPS did all the research, employed all of the therapists, negotiated with the FDA. We were the sponsor at the level of the FDA. It's kind of dangerous when you think you know everything about your subject, but I thought I knew everything about drug development that was relevant. I got my PhD, it was all about FDA drug regulation. I'd taken a class at Harvard Law School with Peter Barton Hutt, who's the world expert in FDA drug regulation, used to be the FDA lawyer. He wrote the textbook, teaches at Harvard Law, but he's with Covington Burling, one of the firms in DC that did not knuckle under to Trump when the law firms all started knuckling under to Trump. But I took his class. And so I just assumed that MDMA would become a generic, that it was invented by Merck in 1912. It was in the public domain, that MDMA for therapy was talked about before I even knew MDMA existed. I didn't know enough about the patent situation. But in 2014, I learned about an obscure policy that was actually created in 1984 by Ronald Reagan that provided incentives for the FDA to give to companies that developed drugs that were off patent. And the reason I never learned about it in Peter's class or in my dissertation is because pharma companies never used it, because they only wanted patents, that they would have a longer life of exclusivity. But data exclusivity is 5 years in the US, 10 years in Europe. And it means it's different than a patent. It means that you have exclusive use of your data. Another company can develop MDMA for PTSD with their own data, but nobody was doing that. So anyway, I realized that there was a way to tell a different story to donors, which was to say, if you keep donating, eventually we'll be able to make money through this data exclusivity and use that money in a public benefit pharma company, 100% owned by the nonprofit. And we'll use that for more research and things like that. So that was the idea. So right now, the pharma company, Lycos, is exclusively in charge of making MDMA into a medicine for PTSD in the US. MAPS is rebuilding our research capacity more in a humanitarian context. And also, so we've done projects in Somaliland. We're working towards doing research in Lebanon. We're trying to do work in Africa. We want to globalize access for this net zero trauma idea. We have a $12.9 million grant from the state of Michigan to do cannabis for PTSD and 320 veterans. So MAPS is, but I'd say the most potentially, from a domestic point of view, is MDMA for couples therapy. So MDMA, by virtue of reducing your fear, by helping you feel the self-acceptance, it's tremendous for relationships because you can be more honest, you can be less defensive, you can be more heartfelt, and you can be a better listener. So I think MDMA has incredible potential for couples therapy, but it's the exact kind of thing that I like of policy getting in the way of science. So, and that's where we've done a lot of work with marijuana policy, with psychedelic policy. But right now, the FDA has only made drugs into medicines for diagnosable disorders in the DSM, like anxiety, depression. They've never made psychedelics into a medicine or anything into a medicine for what you might call lifestyle. Like, oh, I want a spiritual experience, or couples therapy, which might feel like a diagnosis, but it's not specifically. So MAPS is going to be doing academic research with MDMA for couples therapy, where we will either work with researchers who will be the sponsor investigators, or one day we will be the sponsor. Different ways like that.
The therapists come in all of this. Who trains them, and how?
Thank you for asking
the
that.
human component is so difficult to standardize.
Yes. So in order to do the research with the FDA, we realized that FDA doesn't regulate psychotherapy, but that we need to standardize the psychotherapy. So starting in 2004, 2005, we started developing what's called a treatment manual that standardizes our therapy. And the treatment manual is up on the MAPS website. So if anybody wants to look at it, you just go to maps.org and you put in treatment manual and it'll take you to it. We also have what's called adherence criteria. So the same way that public benefit is meaningless unless you quantify it and link it to performance by the CEO and the leadership, which we've been unable to do at Lycos. The same way that you need to really sort of quantify how well people are adhering to your therapy. So that's called adherence criteria. We have core competencies. We have numerical ways. We've trained independent raters to watch the videotapes of the therapy sessions, give supervision and feedback back to the therapist, so that we have high fidelity, 90% plus of therapists following the manual and all these different ways. So we have a highly standardized but open kind of, what I mean is that the traditional therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, prolonged exposure, they're made so that they're like a script that therapists follow. And so the core aspect of our what we call inner-directed therapy is that we support what's emerging from people, that we're not putting our own agenda on top of it, that we support what's emerging either in the body. Sometimes, as Bessel's book, The Body Keeps the Score, sometimes traumas or feelings, emotions, memories come in physical pains. Then over a while, they'll crystallize into an experience. I mean, just to give you one example of this, long time ago, I worked with this German doctor, and his arm became paralyzed while he was doing MDMA. He couldn't move it. He was terrified. He's like, we need to go to the emergency room. My arm is paralyzed. I'm like, MDMA doesn't paralyze people's arms. There's something more going on. And over a period of hours where we persuaded him we didn't have to go anywhere, he started telling us this story about how he and his family were at the deathbed of their father, who was dying, and was totally supported on life support. And the family decided that they would stop the life support. And he was the doctor. He writes this order. But what he was telling us is that he hated his father. And he was confused. Did he kill his father intentionally? Was this out of compassion? Was this out of anger? And then over hours, it became clear to him and all others that his mother had thought this was the right thing. His siblings had thought this was the right thing. And as he worked through it, his feeling came back to his arm. So the paralysis went away. So it was completely psychosomatic, but he couldn't deal with it directly. Like, did I kill my father? That had bothered him the whole time, but it started out with this paralysis. So anyway, our therapeutic method is to support whatever is emerging, that there's an inner wisdom, and that there's elements where you confront your original trauma. That's called exposure therapy, or you can rethink certain things. Like here's another example. One of the patients, this is an incredible story, was in his first of 3 MDMA sessions, he realized that there was something he was gaining from having PTSD. that there was a benefit from PTSD. And that was that he was honoring his dead friends that way.
Yeah.
As long as he was troubled by their memory of all of his friends who died in Iraq, that this was, he was keeping their memory alive. And he was able to sort of see himself from his dead friends' eyes. And they were like, we're dead. We can't live. We would rather you honor our memory by letting us live through you. Go forward in your life. Don't squander your life. We can't live. Let us live through you. And then he said to himself, okay, maybe there's a different way I can honor my friends and I will live. So what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And in that moment, he said he cured himself of PTSD. Then he said, I'm on opiates for pain, but I don't think I need opiates anymore. I'll just deal with the pain. It's mostly emotional pain. And then he said, I don't need MDMA anymore. I'm done. And the therapist said, okay, you can drop out any time you want, but would you do the 2-month and 1-year follow-up? He said yes. And at 2 months, no PTSD, 1 year, no PTSD. And that's 15 years ago. So that was how he had an insight that reframed how he thought that helped cure PTSD. So that's, you could say, cognitive behavioral therapy in certain ways. So there's elements of different therapies that go into our method, but it's always in response to what's emerging. So that's how we've dealt with it. We've had a very robust system of adherence raters and fidelity ratings and quantifying what the method is.
Would you say that MDMA is a facilitator or accelerator of the process? Because there are people saying that they get to the same point via meditation, for example. Is it a very similar path, just compressed in time?
Well, I think this idea of people getting to the same place with meditation points to the fact that what's going on is not from the drug. It's from inside us. And there are many pathways. So yeah, MDMA is not the only way. Psychedelics are not the only way. Meditation can be a good way, but meditation in general takes a lot of practice. It's difficult. It's a little bit different in that you're not trying to get, in most forms of meditation, there's different kinds, you're not trying to get attached to what's coming up in your mind and your emotions, trying to let it go, sort of just see sort of the content of your brain, but not attached to it. And with psychedelic therapy or any kind of therapy, you're trying to get attached to it and reframe things rather than push it. But I'm saying people can do a lot with meditation, with holotropic breath work, with other ways. And there's other forms of therapy than ours. You could combine MDMA. One of the most important ones that's being done right now is what's called cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. So conjoint means dyad or couples where one has PTSD and it affects the relationship, and you bring both people into the relationship and both get MDMA. So there's a researcher, Ann Wagner, in Toronto that's doing a study right now, 15 couples with where one has PTSD and they both get MDMA compared to 15 couples getting cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy without MDMA. We've already done 6 dyads before with great results where both get MDMA. And there's even studies inside the VA. So I think what this is pointing to also is that the designated patient is actually part of a bigger system. And when you look at the family system, like the partner, there's also a place called Sunstone in Rockville, Maryland, that does a lot of research with different psychedelics, but they've done work with cancer patients, a partner, who both get MDMA. And eventually we're moving to group therapy. And I think that that's already begun. And what I'm looking forward to, particularly around the world, because most countries don't have the number of psychiatrists or therapists that we have in the US. Like in Rwanda, there's hardly any. So one of the things we were talking about in Rwanda is if we indeed do training of therapists, some of the Rwanda people that we talked to said 1/3 should be indigenous healers of whatever kind that they have. Another 1/3 should be people that come from religious communities like chaplains or things like that. And then the other third should be more like traditional healers, psychiatrists, therapists, nurses, things like that. So I think group therapy, and what I'm looking forward to eventually is like when you think about Ukraine or you think about people that are refugees or they're traumatized together in families. I think treating families together, including younger children that have been traumatized. So what's happening, we're about a mile away from McLean Hospital as part of Harvard Medical School. And so there's a project that's going to be beginning there very soon for 18 to 22-year-olds with PTSD. And that's just a preparation for them doing adolescents, younger adolescents and younger kids with trauma. The FDA has indicated in the past that if they give permission for MDMA-assisted therapy to be a prescription medicine, it will be for 18 years or older, but they will require studies called pediatric studies with younger people. So that's what I'm looking forward to a lot of around the world, would be working with refugees and others, working with families traumatized together, where they can be their support for each other. And so anyway, I think that's both makes a lot of sense. It's more controversial because you hear about the drug war to protect kids from drugs, things. But I think for kids that have trauma, their brains are already not functioning normally.
What about the healthy? So I think like
Great
one thing
point.
that's it's less of a it's a more difficult topic in a way because it's not as cut and dried like anybody, it's not bipartisan in a way,
Yeah.
or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But I guess one hesitance I always had about psychedelics when I first saw that, I was probably first exposed to people doing them in college, and I actually was pretty put off because they were doing them in these party settings.
Yeah.
And and looking back on it, I honestly still feel that way, having done them myself, and have a very positive opinion. But I just think, if you're going to be, like you're saying, it's like adding memories to your childhood, or, this is a very serious thing. The question is, what's do you have tips and tricks, or like where would you like to see the culture, like in the ideal world, the culture of kind of the healthy, quote unquote, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
Using psychedelics in their lives, like what's a constructive way to do that? What are the kind of rules of thumb that like would help people get more out of it?
Okay, so also in a sense, you're talking about either medicine, where you work with people that have disorders, or preventative medicine.
Yeah, or optimization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that in order for us to get to the point where it's legally available for people, for optimization, for preventative medicine, for personal growth, for couples therapy, just for spiritual experiences, that's going to be outside of the medical frame. So we need drug policy reform to do that. But I think that's going to be one of the best uses for it, was rites of passage as people are growing up, to kind of process things early. But the other part of it is these religious psychedelic churches, which are growing incredibly. My favorite is, and I'll explain why it's my favorite, but it's called the Church of Ambrosia, and started by a friend of mine, David Hodges. And the Church of Ambrosia is in the Oakland, in the Bay Area. It has 125,000 members, and they provide around 90 pounds of mushrooms every month to the members. Now, I think what's keeping them sort of safe is it's not a mail order business. You have to go to the church and pick them up, but then you get this instructions for how to have a spiritual experience on your own at home. In Oregon, the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative was sort of the first statewide reform, and they are explicitly for two kinds of people: one that have diagnosis, one that wants to just personal growth. And they work with guides who have licenses to do therapy or not. So you can be an underground therapist and you can go through their training program, and then you can be now legally authorized to give psilocybin to people. Similar situation is being created in Colorado, which is also going to be for multiple different psychedelics. New Mexico just passed a bill, but it'll be more limited to medical diagnosis. So I think that, as we started earlier by talking about Island by Aldous Huxley and this idyllic society with psychedelics, and they had rites of passage for kids. They had psychedelics throughout the lifespan. So I do think that if we move from treating illness to preventative medicine kind of thinking, we're going to move more and more towards psychedelics for personal growth, for the healthy, for optimization. And I think that's completely appropriate, and that's where we need to go. And so the psychedelic religions are one way where, right now.
You mean that from like a legal perspective, or from? But what about from like the practical? Let's say I'm, at this point, they're almost legal on a personal level. Like there are not a lot of people getting in trouble for using psychedelics, right? So that's more of like a a game that's being played somewhere in the upper echelons of, pharma, politics, whatever.
Yeah.
But like on the personal level, it's that's probably less important now than it was 20 years ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that because of the crisis of fentanyl
Yeah.
and the overdoses with opiates and fentanyl, the DEA would get a lot of criticism if they were going after underground psychedelic therapists, and people are dying at enormous rates from overdoses to fentanyl
Mhm.
and opiates. So there's been generally a change in public attitudes towards psychedelics. People don't automatically think underground psychedelic therapists are terrible. And now, the rise of the religious right, you can do so much in the name of religion. You can discriminate in the name of religion. You can do all sorts of things so that there's not hardly any enforcement against psychedelic churches. So I think that this attitude, if we look at what kids are being educated in schools about psychedelics, it's still pretty much anti-drug war propaganda
Mhm.
about anti-psychedelics. Marijuana causes lung cancer, which it does not, but people are still being taught that marijuana causes lung cancer. So I think what we need to do eventually is move towards honest drug education.
Hmm.
We need to move towards harm reduction techniques. So MAPS started the Zendo project, which is psychedelic harm reduction at Burning Man and other festivals where people take psychedelics for fun, but a lot of them catalyze deeper experiences that they're often not prepared for. When Sasha Shulgin and Ann Shulgin, sort of the godfather of MDMA, reinvented it in the 60s and early 70s and helped move it into therapy, primarily like around 76 and on, he put out a pamphlet. Ann and Sasha had this pamphlet of a couple pages of education about MDMA that went along with the MDMA itself. But it ended as there's no such thing as a casual experiment. Meaning that even if you take it for fun, you need to respect it. You need to be open for whatever comes up. And when you're not, it makes it more likely to be a difficult experience. So, for example, this was now probably about 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Okay, so we had two women contact us in the same week, and both had the same story. They had taken MDMA at a party setting, and memories of sexual abuse had come up. And they, one of them said that she was with a bunch of friends for a party. They didn't want to talk about it because she knew it would be more serious. She stuffed her feelings down, and months later, she's feeling worse off. And so MDMA was harmful to her in this way because it brought stuff to the surface that she wasn't prepared to deal with. Then the same woman, a different woman said, same story, but she was with a girlfriend. They went off into the corner. They talked about the trauma. She worked through it a lot. She went back to the party. She had a great time. Now she thinks MDMA should be great for PTSD. And she thought she came up with the idea. So she did a Google search and found out, oh my God, MAPS is researching this. So she contacted us. So I think we need honest drug education, harm reduction at events. We need treatment on demand, ideally paid for by taxes from selling the drug. And we need pure drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that all through this legalization. So I think the drug war is so counterproductive that if we were to end it right this second, it would be better off than we are now. But we should be layering in these other things. So we create a culture and a context that's supportive of experiences for optimization, personal growth in relatively, quote, healthy period. And I'll just add that one of the biggest things that opened me up to psychedelics was my bar mitzvah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that?
Well, nothing happened. In other words, I'm the oldest of four kids. And I'm just thinking, great, this is kind of awkward,
That's it.
being an adolescent. I'm going to turn into a man. I'm going to have this confrontation with God. I'm going to be spiritually changed. This has been going on for thousands of years. The bar mitzvah is this big rite of passage, this big transformation. And I'm sure it did work like that for many people in the past. But for me in America, whatever, I'm bar mitzvahed and I'm sitting in my bed the next morning and I'm just thinking, shit, I'm the same. It must be that a lot of people got bar mitzvahed and God's busy. So tomorrow I'll have something happen.
Do you know this joke? This like classic Jewish joke I learned recently. It's one Jew asks another Jew, "Why is there something instead of nothing?" And the other one says, "If there was nothing, you would still be complaining."
That's funny.
It's
I like that. That's really good. Yeah. So it was when I was 17 that I took LSD, and I said, "This is what my bar mitzvah should have been." You know, who am I? Where do I fit in? What's my ego? What's this bigger thing? What's this spiritual, enormous universe? So I really feel that we need to reintroduce psychedelics into rites of passage for 12 and 13-year-olds.
That's a very hot take, actually.
Yeah.
I love that take.
That's like if you put PTSD veterans on MDMA on a scale.
Yeah.
That's like far in another side. You know,
but
that's
I really
interesting.
support that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Well, I went to a Navajo Native American peyote ceremony, and a Navajo man brought his 9-year-old son to take peyote and spend the night with us. There's no age limits in the ayahuasca communities.
Yeah,
So it's when kids are ready. So yeah, I think you're right. And that's why I said it, because I really want to open up people's minds. I think that we need a culture that recognizes that there's different transitions, different rites of passage throughout our life, and that psychedelics can be useful throughout the lifespan. But in particular, for younger people, I think, particularly when you're trying to figure out at puberty, but also in college, you know, what are you going to do with your life, or even after high school or in high school, you know, to help people sort of sort out their priorities. So I think that's the best way to move to a preventative medicine kind of a context, is to work with psychedelics in younger ages as they're going through various transitions. And my wife and I, when each of our 3 kids turned 13, because of my experience with my bar mitzvah, and we went to them and we said, "We think you're ready for MDMA or marijuana. If you'd like some, come to us and we'll give it to you, and we can do it together, and you'll see it's pure. You'll see what it's like." So we sort of put into practice.
Right.
The funny thing that we didn't expect was that was the best anti-drug strategy we could have come up with. Our kids all said, "We're not ready. Don't give it to us."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then they were like,
well, you know, if your father is like the psychedelic renaissance guy, it's probably like the least cool thing you could do, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
this is just some boomer psychedelics. Like, get out of here. You know?
yeah.
I still don't have a driver's license because my dad engineers cars.
Oh. That's
Because it's
funny.
like the least cool thing I can.
That's really hilarious. Yeah.
I mean, an interesting question is that I think maybe you might have a lot of insight into this, like having worked on this life mission for a long time. How do people find their life mission? Like, is it something that you get hit with, you know, kind of, if you're open to it, it'll hit you at some points? Is it something that you go out and search for actively? Like, what's your take on this?
Well, let me just turn it around for a second. Do you have a life mission, and how did you find it?
I think not to the same extent that you do. You know, it's interesting. It's definitely not this definite goal where it's like there's this problem in the world and I want to, let's say, eliminate it or overcome it. I think it's more, you know, it's more subverbal. So I do feel like I'm extremely driven in some direction, but I don't have words for it fully. You know, I could say something, but it's more subconscious, you know. And how it got put in there, I don't know.
Okay, and could you answer that question?
Yeah, my search is for objective truth. So I would say that is my life's mission, but it is not, again, it's not as actionable as, for instance, this specific mission, because it can manifest in many different ways. But I try to have all of my work be under that guide.
Yeah, and you know, my kids also raised the exact same question, because they didn't know what they wanted to do when they are 18 years old, you know, and they were very confused about how they would direct their lives. And I think what did it for me was, as a very young boy, just being told stories about how 1/3 of the Jews in the whole world were murdered. And if the war had ended in a different way, the rest of the 2/3 would have been murdered too. And that somehow or other we survived. And now I'm living in the most free country in the world.
Right.
and I have the opportunity to do whatever I want. My parents are giving me this sense of obligation almost.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I was raised was that I was part of this multi-generational line, and I happened to sort of win the generational lottery. So my great grandparents on one side were refugees from Russia in 1880 to the US. My grandfather on my dad's side came from Poland in 1920. So they were refugees, and they came to America with virtually nothing. And one side of the family made successful business, and so the American dream and all. And then I'm born right after World War II, and being given the freedom to do whatever I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But with this sense of this could turn around at any minute, before you know it, there could be, oh, look what just happened. 170 billion or something like that is going to ICE. And this is to build concentration camps throughout America. And you think they're going to start with immigrants and stop there? So it's a terrifying situation of what we see happening. But I grew up thinking this could happen again. And the fact that I'm alive and part of this multi-generational stream, I have some obligation with this freedom to contribute back.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know how. I just, and then I'd say one other thing my parents did, which was really educational. So because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was very interested in the other. So the high school I went to, New Trier East, outside of Chicago, was a really great school. And they had Russian. So I took Russian in high school. And so I had 4 years of Russian.
У тебя что-нибудь осталось по-русски?
Я
или нет?
говорю очень плохо по-русски.
Okay.
Я ничего не знаю. Я забыл все. I forgot everything, frankly. So after my junior year of high school, this is now 1970, and my parents decided to send me to Russia with about 60 U.S. high school students. And it was to go study the Russian language. And it was just this incredible trip. But they gave me Jewish prayer books to bring to the people at the synagogue. Now, this is communism, atheism, prayer books were illegal. And so my parents trained me to be an activist, that if you are able to do something little, you can't undo this whole system of repression of Judaism or religion in general, but maybe you can bring a prayer book. You should do something. So they gave me these 2 prayer books that took a lot of space in my luggage. And then when we get there, me and 2 guys were more comfortable. We met a lot of the young Russian black market kids. So this is now 1970. We have the psychedelic revolution going on in America. They didn't have anything like that. So they wanted to buy blue jeans and button shirts. And one of our high school students had Abbey Road, a copy of Abbey Road, the actual record. So my friends and I would sell stuff for all of these people, and we would get rubles and we'd take our cut. But rubles were worthless outside of Russia. There's another way to make it so nobody could escape. And you had to be poor if you were to escape. So I had thousands of dollars worth of rubles, and I had these prayer books, and I went to the synagogue in Moscow, and I met this guy there, and I said, I'd like to give you all this money and these prayer books. And he said, don't do it right now. We're being observed, but I'll meet you in the subway station at this place at this time. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm James Bond. This is exciting. And then I thought, I'm just a stupid little 16-year-old, if I get caught, they'll just send me back. That was my thought. So I did it. I met this guy in the subway, did this transfer. So I was sort of trained, I would say, by my parents to be an activist and to do something. I also remember thinking about Vietnam and thinking about when I'm like 15 and 16 and what's happening, and the Beatles were coming around, but I was just like stupid, silly love songs. I thought, the world's on flame and we could destroy the world, and they're just singing, I want to hold your hand.
It's very interesting that, I think a lot of, if you look at I think a good example is like Greta Thunberg or something.
Yes.
But if you look at people that get into activism young, at least in our generation, I find that they tend to not want to do the work. I don't think Greta is doing the type of work that you did, have done with MAPS, where it's like, okay, here's the real situation. I'm going to go get a law degree and grind at this for the next 30 years and have some kind of real, serious, for example, is Greta studying energy, energy law and policy? Is she studying? Did she go get a engineering degree to figure out like what is the real solution to climate change? I think she's doing a lot of basically like social media, and I think that's I wonder if that was that also typical in your generation?
Well, no, because first off, we didn't have social media.
Right,
but I
right.
would say that one of the sayings is that law and politics are downstream of culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think even science is downstream of culture. Like when culture was terrified of psychedelics, we couldn't do psychedelic science. So I would say in favor of Greta,
Okay.
what she's doing is the most important work, which is trying to change cultural attitudes. So she doesn't need to be the scientist that designed some new solar collector. But if she can get people to care enough about climate change. Now, clearly, we look at the latest big ugly bill that just got passed, and it's completely destructive
Mm-hmm.
of renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the work that Greta was trying to do through social media and others is create enough of support so that a bill like that would never be passed. But it was. So I think that if she were to narrow her focus to become, I'm going to be an engineer, she would have less impact.
So my dream version of Greta, and I think that some people like this do exist, is the nuclear Greta. So basically, like there are like social media kind of like attractive social media girls that are into nuclear, and their whole brand is like for example, like taking photos next to there's like these nuclear waste canisters that are in reality extremely safe, but people are terrified of them.
You have an interesting Instagram feed.
No, but I don't use Instagram, so this has to filter into Twitter for me to see it. But basically, like, so I'm not seeing everything, but basically, like, the real data is that so many people are killed by coal just through the air pollution that actually, it's basically nuclear. I think with the fullness of time, people have kind of realized that nuclear might be a very good option. And I think that my dream version of Greta is like someone with nuance about nuclear, and I think she didn't have time to develop that nuance because she just became a celebrity.
But it's the same as with CEOs.
She didn't go through the work and struggle of like, for example, getting an advanced degree and like figuring out, what is really going on out there before like developing very strong opinions.
She's more like the inspirational figurehead. It's the same as with CEOs. Like you can have like the more inspirational leadership type, or you can have the more integrating manager who's like operational, and it needs both.
Yeah. So I would say that there's a person that maybe fits your characteristic here, the nuclear Greta.
Yeah.
So this was a woman that changed my mind about nuclear energy, because I was also very much against it, thinking it's too close to nuclear weapons and it's dangerous and 3 Mile Island and all of that. But woman Isabel, who is married to Joe Gebbia, one of the founders of Airbnb. And so she did a really good TED Talk, Isabel Benke, about nuclear and how that is something that's similar to psychedelics. It's been demonized, it's been prejudiced, but it has great potential. And it can be done in a safe way. So I think for people that are looking for the the modern day nuclear Greta, check out Isabel and her TED Talk. And I think that I was similarly prejudiced, and it really took me reading a bunch of books that she suggested I read to help me change my mind about that.
What do you think is different in Massachusetts to, say, Oakland? Because last year we were able to vote on whether or not to legalize psychedelics.
Yes. Okay. So I guess, the question is, why did it fail?
Yes.
So we had, years ago, it began with Denver making mushrooms the lowest enforcement priority. Then it moved to the Oregon psilocybin initiative. Then it moved to Colorado passing with multiple different plants. And and then in Massachusetts was the Natural Plant Initiative. We had fundraising events right here in this exact spot for that. And it went down to defeat 57% no, 43% yes. So what happened was, I would blame a lot of it actually, or attribute a fair amount of it to the pharma company that MAPS created, that made a series of mistakes. And so what happened is we lost control of the public narrative on psychedelics. So the pharma company decided to be like a traditional pharma company and not to respond to critics, not to say anything, to have what they called a quiet period, like a year and a half or so before the FDA would review it. Let's have a quiet period, which maybe works for drugs that nobody's ever heard of. So then you get the critics who now pretty much wait until it looks like you might succeed. They're not really active when it looks like it doesn't matter. But then the pharma company decided not to respond to the critics, and that led to a series of meetings that were negative, and then the FDA rejected MDMA. So I really attribute it not to the critics, which were unfair in many cases and inflammatory, but to the lack of a response. So this again is culture is predominant before you get to the law and politics. So we lost the culture. The FDA rejected it. There's all sorts of negative articles about things. Oh no, it's hype. The bubble has burst. And then I think there was a bit of an overreach on the part of the drafters of the legislation, where it wasn't just medical access under trained guides or therapists, and not just medical, but also for personal growth or for optimization, but it was also home grow. And the mistake that they made was to say that you could grow your own mushrooms in a 12 by 12 ring.
Yes, I was about to say, I remember the size that you can grow, and I was thinking like, whoa, that's a lot.
Yes.
You know, like if they allowed like a foot by foot, 12 by 12 inches, that would be like personal consumption, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That was the key mistake. So we lost control of the narrative, and they were trying to support personal growth in a way that it seemed like it was industrial quantities. You know, and so, but I think it was really those kind of state initiatives pass when people say the FDA process is too slow, people are suffering now, let's make it available in different ways. Also, people should have this access for personal growth as well. So when all this energy was created about questioning whether our data was any good, and then the FDA rejects it, then the imperative to try to make things available before FDA didn't seem so clear to voters. And so that's why I think it lost. And I think we may come around again in 2028. And that should hopefully be after FDA approval of MDMA, after FDA approval of psilocybin. And then there'll be more support, I think, for state level.
What's the bar that you have to hit realistically to get these drugs FDA cleared? And what's the, or approved, is it approved? It's a PMA, I guess. So it's approved. Like what?
Oh, PMA meaning
like 510K versus PMA. I guess there's like this. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's like a technical term. I'm used to saying FDA cleared because I work in medical devices.
Yeah.
Which are typically 510K.
That's what they say. Cleared. Yeah.
But is it what's the bar, and who do you overall, like in the whole industry, who do you think is doing interesting work and like is likely to actually get commercialized?
Yeah.
Like which companies or groups?
Okay, so the bar is considered to be 2 randomized, controlled, double-blind studies that are called phase 3 studies that prove safety and efficacy. That's what you need to hit. There's a situation where you can get approved just with 1 phase 3 study, and that's where you have statistical significance of 0.001. So 1 in 10,000 that it's statistically significant. So when you have 0.05, which is 1 in 20, or actually 0.001 is 1 in thousands. So when you have 0.05, that's 1 in 20. And you have to have 2 of those that are considered independent. So the chances are 1 in 20 times 1 in 20, 1 in 400.
That it was an accident, that the data came out good.
Yeah. That it was a random factor, not your intervention. So if you get 1 in 1,000, 0.001 on your first phase 3 study, you can apply to FDA and say, we beat the statistics for 2 of them and we should get approval. So we did that actually. But I knew that a big issue with FDA was going to be the double blind. How do we do the double blind study with psychedelics?
Yeah, it seems so obvious. Taking MDMA, the effect should be so perceptible. How do you blind it?
Yeah. So a big part of my dissertation was exactly on how do you do a double blind study. And what I realized is that we needed to negotiate with FDA. We needed to get FDA to buy into the design. And so once you get approved at what's called an end of phase 2 meeting to go to phase 3, phase 2 is basically to figure out all the things you need to do to design phase 3. What's your outcome measures? What's your treatment? What's your effect size? How do you scale for statistical significance? Your studies, who do you include? Who do you exclude? So we did 16 years of phase 2 studies from 2016, got approved to go to phase 3. And then we entered in this special protocol assessment process where you negotiate every aspect with FDA about what your phase 3 design would be. And then, so the solution that I had for doing a double-blind study with psychedelics was going to be therapy with low dose of whatever the psychedelic was versus therapy with full dose. Everybody then has the same expectancy. They're all going to get MDMA. They just don't know which dose they're going to get, or psilocybin. That's better than inactive placebo or active placebo of another drug that acts differently. The therapist can tell the difference. Patients can often identify the difference as well. So the idea, though, was that...
Do you reveal to the patient that there's no placebo? Like, because
you can
then they can start thinking, am I on the high dose or the low dose,
Well, yeah, if you are in the informed consent process, they have to be prepared for whatever it is that they might get.
Okay.
But the challenge was to find the dose that's right. So microdose doesn't work because if I were to give you a microdose, you're not going to be confused that it's a full dose. If I give you a little bit less than a full dose, it's going to be very therapeutic. And so there's going to be no real difference. It'd be very hard to tell the difference between the two groups. So the question is, what's the dose that's high enough to cause confusion, but not so high that it's therapeutic? Then that becomes your control condition. So that's what we spent 16 years looking for. Wow. And we did therapy with no MDMA. We did therapy with 25 milligrams of MDMA, 30 milligrams, 40, 50, 75, 100, 125, and 150. And in our approach, we would do half the initial amount after 2 hours. Well, really between 1.5 and 2 hours, some flexibility. And that was not to make it stronger, but to extend the plateau. So what Doblin has found with the neuroplasticity and the critical periods is that the longer you're in the psychedelic state, the longer the critical period lasts afterwards. Ibogaine can be a day or two you're impacted, and it can be months that this critical period is over. So we did this studies, and what we discovered, two things that surprised us. The first thing we discovered is that the lower doses did produce 25, 30, 40, 50, did produce a certain amount of confusion. You felt something, you don't know, you've maybe never taken it before. You're a bit confused. Is it the full dose or not? But it made people uncomfortable. So it's like taking off from an airplane where there's turbulence at the beginning and then it's smooth sailing. So people that got therapy with no MDMA did better than people who got therapy with low-dose MDMA. People that with low-dose MDMA still got better, but not as much because they were in this awkward place of being catalyzed and stimulated, but not enough fear reduction. Then we did a study with 30 milligrams, 75 milligrams, and 125 that was in firefighters, veterans, and police officers. And what we discovered there is, as you know, randomization doesn't always make the groups equal. It just makes them random. So in this particular study, the group that had 125 had more comorbid depression with the PTSD than the group that had 70. But the 75 milligram group did slightly better than the 125 milligram, which was shocking to us because it's a lot of us don't really like that dose either, and you like a stronger dose. But the 75 was incredibly therapeutic. So we did not find the sweet spot between a dose that doesn't compromise the therapy or enhance the therapy. So we went to the FDA during this special protocol assessment process and said, we can give you blinding if you want, but you're going to make our job easier to find a difference between the two groups than if we just did therapy with no MDMA at all, with inactive placebo. And I said, the other thing is that if we do therapy with inactive placebo, we're going to have a better safety database because we know that whatever is going to happen is due to people with severe PTSD or moderate to severe PTSD going through therapy. And so the FDA brought in Bob Temple, who's the old wise man of the FDA. He was there since 1972, the Office of Science Policy, to our final meeting. And they chose therapy with inactive placebo versus therapy with full dose MDMA. This was now 2017, 2018. We started the phase 3 studies. But then what happened is the people we negotiated with at FDA left the FDA. Now, you're supposed to negotiate with the agency, not with the individuals. But a new, more conservative bunch took over at the Division of Psychiatry. We've won 2 formal disputes with this division where we hire lawyer scientists to go after the FDA for things that they're saying that don't make sense from a scientific point of view. And we both times got the Division of Psychiatry overruled by senior members of the FDA. And that's what we hope will happen now, that senior members of the FDA will overrule the Division of Psychiatry that rejected MDMA. And hopefully, Lykos will not have to do another phase 3 study. They'll be able to do what we call a phase 4 study. You can gather additional information post-approval. So that's what's going to be discovered. So what is the actual standard that you have to meet? It's a little bit questionable because we negotiated with the FDA on the exact design of the phase 3, and then they reneged on it with these new, more conservative people. And then our pharma company didn't defend what we had done before. So it was a combination of the FDA and the pharma company leaving the field, basically. But basically what you need to do is 2 phase 3 studies. So after our first phase 3 study, where we had 0.0001, 1 in 10,000, statistical significance, we went to the FDA and said, hey, we don't need to do a second phase 3 study. Will you give us permission? And they said, no, we want the second phase 3 study for safety, not for efficacy. So then we do that. That was 0.00025, 1 in 2,500. It was really also a tremendous study. So it was 1 in 25 million that it was random, that it wasn't due to the MDMA more than placebo. But the FDA rejected that because of concerns over functional unblinding, and the FDA advisory committee was against it. So what's happening now in the field is, to get to your other question about who's going to succeed and what's going to be happening, is that 2 things are happening. One is that the pharma companies in general are running away from therapy. They're just trying to be ketamine, Spravato, which is now selling over $1 billion, projected to maybe go up to $3 billion a year, major blockbuster, but S-ketamine, one of the isomers of ketamine, approved without therapy.
Lots of online shops.
Online shops, Mindbloom and other companies. And also, it's sort of the perfect pharma model because pharma is interested in selling drugs. When you combine ketamine with therapy,
it's less scalable. That's the issue. It's less scalable.
Well, that's true, but also it's more perverse than that, I would say. When you combine when you combine ketamine with therapy, you get better results, longer durability, and you need less ketamine.
That's very interesting.
And the pharma company, Johnson & Johnson, doesn't make any money on the therapy. They just make money on selling.
Right.
So we see that the for-profit psychedelic companies are moving more and more towards trying to minimize therapy. And they're even instructing therapists in the room, don't do therapy. You're supposed to just provide some safe support, but don't do therapy because of the scaling idea.
Yeah.
Then they're not at the same time looking at what's best for patients or the patient outcomes. So in addition to not doing therapy, the pharma companies are trying in their best way that they can to try to isolate the pharmacological effects, which do have important effects in a way. People have talked about non-psychedelic psychedelics. So the word is neuroplastogens that we can give for people. So I think that the companies now that are likely to succeed, there's 2 main 3 companies that are working on psilocybin. Cybin, Compass was the first. Usona, Compass is for-profit. Usona is a nonprofit. Cybin is for-profit. it's hard to say which is going to be first. Compass was first. It had a head start, but they were looking at treatment-resistant depression for psilocybin. And they've had a very difficult time enrolling people because the definition of treatment resistance is you have to failed on 2 different pharmacotherapies of a certain period of time. And
Right, it's like a narrow funnel.
it's a very, very narrow funnel. So USONA, which started behind Compass, is looking for psilocybin for major depressive disorder. And that's a lot easier to enroll. So I'd say it's unclear what's going to go first, Compass or USONA. My guess is it could be USONA, actually, but I don't really know. Then there's Atai Beckley, which is looking at 5-MeO-DMT for depression. So that's smoked. It's very short. It's within this 2 hours. That's people have to be under observation at ketamine clinics. There's thousands of ketamine clinics. So I think 5-MeO-DMT will be after the psilocybins get approved, probably after MDMA gets approved as well. And then there's all sorts of Gilgamesh is trying to make ibogaine in a way that is less impactful on the heart. So
the Gilgamesh went through Y Combinator alongside my company. We were in the same little group.
Oh.
And it's pretty typical for YC founders to invest in each other's companies. And I didn't have much money back then, but I was just very impressed with the founder. So I invested like when they were going through we were all in the same small group together, and he would talk about his company, and he was always the calmest, most like, just spiritually present person in
this Jonathan Sporn.
Yeah. This is during COVID, so it was all by Zoom, right? So I've actually never met him in person, but I just like had such a great impression of him that I was like, can I please, just like put whatever my tiny check into your company, and so I'm like a very small investor in that.
Well, that's one of the few investments that's turned out.
Yeah, I don't know, but it was purely, I understood, I knew something about what he was doing because we were all practicing our pitches together, right? It's like this group therapy thing where it's like talk about your company 100 times.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was purely a bet on him, I just thought he was like, I was like, he seemed to be, they were developing some of the stuff they were developing were like microdose drugs.
Yes.
And he seemed to be on them. Like he was like experimenting with them during this. Like I remember I'm serious, and I was impressed. I was like, this guy is doing great, like he was, like he was actually very effective, so I thought the drugs probably work also, I don't know. I haven't really kept up with like what their situation is, but that was, I guess, 5 years ago, roughly, right? Like 5.5 years
Do you know
ago.
their story about the big pharma company they've? Oh my God, they've got like a $2 billion deal.
Wow,
incredible! You should.
I know they're doing well because I know they raise a lot of money. Is that public?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
A bunch of this is public.
Is that for? I remember he was working on ibogaine, like safer ibogaine.
Yes,
is that what it is? Okay,
it's that and other things as well. He's working on.
Yeah, I thought that was an amazing idea. To like because of opiates, right? Like ibogaine is good for opiate addiction, and
I'm not clear that the version that they're going to develop with lower impact on the heart is going to be as therapeutic as ibogaine itself.
You think there will be a loss? There's a partial.
I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know. Well, actually, we don't exactly know why, but ibogaine does what it does for resetting the brain about dependence on opiates and fentanyl and things like that. So maybe it's connected to whatever it does with the heart, or maybe you separate it out. So we just don't know. And I've not tried any of these new things that Gilgamesh has developed. And so maybe it'll be as good with lower risk. I don't know. But I think Jonathan is, he is brilliant. His heart's in the right place. He's more traditional in the sense I didn't know that they went through Y Combinator, which is great.
He did his presentation, like at the end you do an investor presentation. He did his in front of a fireplace. He was like sitting in like, maybe it's just his living room or something, because this was all deep COVID. Everybody was on Zoom, and he had like a roaring, crackling fireplace behind him. He's just like one of the most memorable people from that whole experience for me was this guy.
Wow, that's great. I really like what he's doing, and so I think Gilgamesh will be right up there.
Oh, that's
among the companies. So you can, I don't know if you can retire on your investment, but it looks like it's going to do really, really well.
Okay, I have to ask about this. I don't know if you've discussed this on a podcast before or anything, but I know that you at some point adopted a wolf.
Yeah, oh, yes,
Like
yes.
at the age, roughly the age of 20 or something like that,
Yeah,
maybe when you were
yeah.
in college. What's the story? What's the wolf story?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. And that's actually where Lycos got its name.
Okay.
So Lycos is the Greek word for wolf. So
Right,
when they
right.
wanted to move away from MAPS Public Benefit Corp, they hired some marketing firm. I had absolutely nothing to do with it. And they picked Lycos as sort of like a link to the founder. All right. So you may have heard a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
You know, I had a roommate in college who was obsessed with that book, and I've literally, it's been whatever, 15 years since I was in college, and I still haven't read it yet. He was recommending it to me for years.
Ah, okay.
So maybe I should read it.
I would recommend it. I loved it. And there was a character in it. The main character is someone who is obsessed with quality. So it's like philosophy. He's obsessed with quality, but he takes it too far. He goes crazy. He gets electroshock. And the story is about him and his sons reuniting as they travel across America on a motorcycle with a friend of his, and how he approaches repairing the motorcycle. So Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. But his alter ego is called Phaedrus. And Phaedrus is a character in the Plato dialogues. He's someone, it's in the dialogue about love. And despite how much Robert Persist was the author, and in this book, he claimed that Phaedrus was the Greek word for. Later, he realized that was wrong. It was Lycos, but at least, so I read this book. So I'm turning 21. I'm deciding I want a dog. My parents were tremendous in every respect, except for, I would say, my mother didn't want us to have any pets because they would make the house filled with dog hair and all this. So we never had a pet growing up. Actually, my grandparents took me to Florida when I was like 12 years old, 10 years old, something like that. And you could buy alligators, baby alligators, for like $1 or something. You'd get them mailed to you, this cardboard box. So I bought a baby alligator and I had it mailed to me in Chicago, and I built this pen. So that was my only pet, was this baby alligator. It was killed by a squirrel eventually. But other than that, I had no pets. So I decided I want this dog. And so I'm looking around, and there's this Great Dane puppy. And I'm like, oh, that's going to get way too big. I don't want that. Then I saw a Doberman puppy. I don't want that. And then this friend of mine saw an ad in the paper, and she said, I just saw this ad in the paper. The Humane Society is looking for people to take care of wolves. And I was fairly shy and insecure. I was about to become 21. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. A wolf. Not only that, but wolves are born with their eyes closed, and it takes them a day or two to open their eyes. And the Humane Society had shut down a wild animal breeding operation. This was in Sarasota, Florida, which was the winter home of the Ringling Brothers Circus and a lot of carnivals and stuff. So this wild breeding operation, not taking care of the animals, they were shut down by the Humane Society. The female wolf was pregnant, and the zoos were full and the sanctuaries. And they knew that the only place that they could put these wolves, you can't reintroduce them into the wild, would be to find some people who would take care of them. So they took them away from their mother from the very beginning when their eyes were closed. And then they were bottle fed by people so they opened their eyes on people. So they bonded on people. These were extremely unusual wolves. And it was a litter of 8. And I thought maybe this could be interesting. And so I saw them and I said, I would like the most dominant of the litter. I figured that I would learn confidence from the dominant wolf of the litter. And they said, okay, but you're going to have to build an area for the wolf to live in, and they have to have chain link fence buried 1.5 feet down, and it has to be a 6-foot fence and the whole thing. So I said, sure. So I had this wolf. I got him when he was 8 weeks old. So that's when he was old enough to be taken away from being bottle fed. And I studied all sorts of books about wolves. I I named him Phaedrus from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And he became like my alter ego, a different part of me, this wild, confident part of me.
The
And
Patronus for the
very much.
Harry
Yes,
Potter
yes.
fans.
Yeah. And I was building a house, and I was building a house at the edge of town. And so it's the classic story of the railroad track, and the railroad track was the edge of the county. And on the other side of the railroad track was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of undeveloped land. So I had this ability to take the wolf running through the woods without a leash with different neighborhood friends or friends of mine. And there was little ponds that we would go swimming in. One of them had an alligator, so we had to watch out for the alligator. Somehow we never thought maybe there's two alligators, but luckily we never found the second
When you're
one.
fighting squirrels.
And so this wolf and I became very intertwined. And what I learned about it is that the alpha male and the alpha female often eat first. So I would feed him chicken necks and backs, and I would lick them first before I would feed him. So I would have, been like the alpha wolf. I did everything I could to reinforce this idea that I'm the alpha wolf. He would howl. It was just incredible. There was one night where I went up to the sun deck on the top of my house, and like he's outside in the pen, and we're just howling together at like 3 a.m. And then I'm just like, oh my God, what do the neighbors think? This is like crazy. But he became somebody who I learned a lot from. Just to give you one example, this is kind of a funny story, but I had a large amount of LSD at the time, and I was worried about getting busted. So a friend of mine, I asked him if he would store my LSD in his freezer on his ranch, 5-acre ranch. And he said, sure. He was not the kind of person that would get suspicious about anything. People be suspicious. So, and he had this Doberman, and I was friends with this Doberman, but it was a Doberman watchdog. All right. So I get there. My wolf now is about 3 months old, and my friend's gone. I want to go get my LSD into the stash, but it's in the back of the barn, this freezer, and the Doberman is right there, camped out right in front of the freezer, and the Doberman is not moving at all. I'm like, maybe, what can I do? So I went and got the wolf, and I just let him off the leash. And this wolf is like 1/3 the size of the Doberman. But he's got this air of confidence. When you're the apex predator, and it gives you confidence. And he just went right up to this Doberman and just like stepped on him. The Doberman's like, what the hell is going on? And he just got up and moved away, and I can go get my LSD stash. So that's how my partnership between this wolf and I. But the other thing, one of the other main things I learned about him that I think has made a big difference at MAPS is this idea that they have so much energy. I mean, they can run for 6, 8, 10 hours. They can just incredible energy. So when we would travel through the woods, if there was a hill, he'd go over it. He wasn't like looking for the most economical way to travel, the least energy. He would go over a hill, or he'd go through a bush, or he just would be straight ahead. And obstacles became opportunities for energy, opportunities for work, so that I felt like with all the setbacks that we had at MAPS, it's just another opportunity to work harder, to figure another way through. And the other thing, where almost every day when I'm out walking or doing something, there's something that reminds me of Phaedrus. That's that when you think of, and this was in a way, goes back to this idea of how to register for the draft. You have to fill in the postcard. We don't really realize how often we're being channeled in different ways. And one of the main ways is through sidewalks and roads. So, if you're walking through campus too, a lot of times they're like, hey, don't walk on the grass, walk on the sidewalk. But that's often not the direct way to where you want to go. So I've learned from Phaedrus to try to go the direct way. And a lot of times when you do that, you might actually have more resistance, but you can end up often at the goal sooner than other people who do these workarounds, even though you have to expend more energy and stuff. So whenever I go straight off the circular sidewalk or something, or through a little ditch, I think that's the wolf. That's teaching me to just go straight ahead. I will say there is one time that was really difficult, and this is a beautiful story, I would say, about my father. So the woods started getting developed, and I didn't feel like he could be a real wolf without running off the leash through the woods with a pack
Mm-hmm.
of people. And so I started looking for a place for him. And a place opened up with a wolf sanctuary that had a female wolf that was looking for a mate. And this female wolf had been captured in the wild and hated people and was 2 years older than Phaedrus. And they were up near Washington, D.C. And I was down in Florida, Sarasota. So it was very difficult. I gave him away. Turned out one of his sisters from the same litter that I didn't know was only a few miles from my house. And a week before I was scheduled to give him away, I found out about his sister, and I introduced the two wolves. And I thought maybe these people could take the wolf to be with his sister, but she howled, and she was now 2 years old, and she had never howled before. It was only with my wolf that she started howling, and they said, "Oh no, we can't do this. We're neighbors. We got neighbors." Anyway, I gave him away, and on the way back, I picked up a hitchhiker who had raised a bear. This guy had raised a bear. It was just incredible. So, in any case, I would go every couple months, 3 months, 6 months or so, to see the wolf and take Phaedrus out for a walk, just to keep the relationship going. There was a girl, Holly, who was a neighborhood girl, who was really older brothers with dogs and snakes and stuff. So she was not scared of animals. She became the best friend of Phaedrus. So it was like this neighborhood girl, me, and Phaedrus were this sort of team. And I've kept in touch with her. And actually, at the end of this year, my family and I are going to go see Holly and go out to see wolves in Montana. And she's a nature photographer and stuff. All right. So anyway, now it's 2 years after I've given him up. Phaedrus is 4, and I go visit him. And I go to take him out for a walk. And he has this growl. And this growl, I tell myself, it's to this female wolf. This female wolf doesn't like people. He wants to be with me. She doesn't want that. He's telling her no. So that's how I interpreted it. So then fella, Ruffin Harris, was the guy that had the sanctuary. He had a glove. He had a chain link leash. And he had Phaedrus on a leash, and he was going to give me Phaedrus to go take for a walk. And I started petting Phaedrus, and Phaedrus didn't welcome my touch. So I could see that there was something going on. Wolves at the age of 4, and that's around the age that they find their way in the pack. So I figure, okay, I have to reassert my dominance. So I got 6 feet away. I'm staring down at him, and I'm just looking at him. This goes on and on and on. And then it's like he's looking past me, like he doesn't notice me anymore in a way. And then there's this, it's like he tenses his muscles. There's this ripple that goes through his body. And then all of a sudden he leaps at me. And he leaps at me so fast that he pulls the chain out of the guy's gloved hand. And he's coming right at my head, this now 4-year-old wolf. And this used to be the way that we would play. We would wrestle all the time. So he would try to push me down. I would try to flip him on his back, get his back paw and flip him on his back. And we do this at dark in the night in his pen where there's a lot of vegetation. And he would come at me from a different angle. And we would do this for extended periods of time. It was really, really fun. So now, though, it's a different story. Now he's coming at me, fearsome kind of, and I'm out of practice. So I try to hit his jaw right at the right spot where it pushes it away. But I miss, and he gets my wrist right in his jaw. And he's now like a foot away from my eyes. He's sailing through the air. He crunches down on my wrist, and he just looks at me like I could go further, but I won't. He lets go, and Ruffin gets him on the chain and takes him away. And I could, that was it. I could never be with him again. He challenged me for dominance. He saw me as another wolf, and I was unprepared to fight the way wolves fight. I would be more hurt. And so I was really sad, and really, this was the end of an era. And so I'm crying, and I call my parents just to say what happened. And my dad, to his credit, said, "What's the problem? You did it to me."
Amazing.
And I'm like, I did do it to you when I was 18, and said, "I'm dropping out of college. I want to study LSD, and I want you to pay for it." And they did. So that reframed everything. So now
Yeah.
Phaedrus is his own wolf. He challenged me for dominance. I was never able to be with him again, but and that was quite a long time. He's no longer alive. But I'd say it's one of the main influences in my entire life.
Hmm.
And that's how Lycos got its name.
Yeah, that's like I call stuff like that like experimental philosophy, you know, because it's like the wolf is, in a way, it's an experiment. You can look at the wolf is a natural system, but it actually contains some philosophy. Like you can see it evolving, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's not human, but it contains some wisdom, right? Because it also like the wolf is subject to a lot of the game theory that people are and things like that. So
Yeah,
you
I think
can
that's
get some philosophy out of it experimentally rather than by coming to that conclusion yourself. You can actually watch the wolf, right?
yeah.
So it has a
Well,
little
the
bit
other
of
thing
like,
too is that I think wolves are a lot like psychedelic in the say that they are the repository of our cultural fears.
Hmm.
So you hear about Little Red Riding Hood and wolf,
Mm.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we're
yeah.
terrified. Wolves don't attack humans.
Hmm.
But people think of wolves like lions and tigers and bears that we're going to be attacked by these wolves, and they don't attack humans. So, and they're great parents. They're tremendous social. They're an advance on humans in certain ways. Is that when wolves struggle for dominance inside the pack, they rarely kill the old wolf.
Hmm.
So sometimes you hear of the lone wolf driven out of the pack, or the fire leader then becomes a follower of the new alpha male. Occasionally they'll kill the old wolf, but not that often.
Hmm.
So humans kill each other all the time. I think wolves have evolved in some more advanced ways.
More pro-social in
More,
that sense.
yeah, more pro-social in that sense. And so it was just this where psychedelics are the repository of our fears. And it's really fears of ourselves. Fears what psychedelics bring to the surface from inside us. And wolves, I think, are similarly demonized, but when you understand the reality, they're not that at all.
Is there anything that we didn't discuss or didn't cover that, you know, you feel like it's, you know, would be interesting to touch on?
Yeah. Well, I would say that group therapy is going to be one of the big examples. And we're doing work. MAPS has helped the Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative and other groups raise money over about $2.25 million for group therapy projects in Israel. And we're also interested in working in Arab countries. So I just was in Beirut. And now we're talking about training Arab therapists and possibly trying to do research in Lebanon. So I think the future of MAPS will a lot be the public education that we do, the psychedelic science. Oh, so we didn't really talk either. Psychedelic Science Conference that we just had in Denver had 8,000 people.
Wow.
In 2023, we had 12,400 people. And so we've got about 300 speakers. All of those videotapes of the latest in psychedelic science from around the world are going to be posted on the MAPS website for free. So if people want to learn the latest science about psychedelics, just go to the MAPS website.
Well, we'll add a link to the description for
good.
sure.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that this sort of what I had hoped the Public Benefit Corporation would do, Lycos, was going to be global humanitarian projects, work through the FDA, explore group therapy, being an expert in the different kind of therapeutic approaches. They've sort of narrowed that down to they just want to be a drug company. They don't want to train therapists, and they want to make MDMA into a medicine through the FDA. They've shut down research in Europe and elsewhere for a while. Maybe permanently, we don't know. So MAPS is doing global humanitarian projects, is doing couples therapy, is cannabis research with veterans, a lot of cultural change, public education like that, and conferences, convening people. And I would say one of the things that I hope for the most, which we did touch on briefly, is just a mile away from here, McLean Hospital is going to be working with adolescents. I think that because when you look at what happened towards public attitudes towards cannabis, when people started talking about CBD for childhood epilepsy, when you start helping people's kids, all of a sudden, you know, you win hearts and minds.
Yes.
So I think that will be a really big step. Start doing work or at McLean at adolescents. I think that's about it. Sure, there's more we could talk about.
What would you, maybe as a last thing, what would you recommend a young person like yourself at 18 who wants to step in your footsteps? how should they go about it? Is there
Yeah, like if they want to contribute
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
field or adjacent fields.
Well, I think the most important thing that we need is more therapists.
Hmm.
Now, there can be neuroscience, like Gilgamesh, is also building on neuroscience. How do you develop a drug that's like ibogaine that doesn't have the impact on the heart? Well, you need to know all the receptor sites of where it goes to. So we need more therapists. We need more neuroscientists. We need more business people that understand running psychedelic clinics. We need more stories. I think if you're a young person at college, potentially check out the drug policy at your college. Probably it's terrible. Now, my son, Eden, who I should add works for Johnson & Johnson, of all things, is 30. But he went to school in Canada at McGill.
Mm-hmm.
And McGill, they had 18-year-old drinking age.
Mm-hmm.
Colleges in America, it's prohibited until you're 21. Everybody drinks, but they pretend it doesn't happen, and it's just all punitive, and they don't educate people. So I would say for young people, it sort of gets back to your question, too, of how do you develop a mission, purpose, or do you even need one? But I'd say there's a lot of work to do locally in your own community. You know this from Cambridge, is that Cambridge thinks of itself as a very liberal community. However, Somerville, which is right also next to Belmont here, they were the ones that first decriminalized plant psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they so embarrassed Cambridge for going first that a couple weeks later, Cambridge did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for young people, it may seem like the world is such a big thing and it's hard to influence, but we have a lot of opportunities to do very important work on a local basis.
Do you still recommend going the path of like still working within the difficult traditional, like you went through and got degrees and kind of worked with people who probably didn't think very highly of what you were interested in, right? Like realistically, probably many of them.
I think that's
Do
true.
you still
Even my
recommend,
parents.
yeah. Do you still recommend the approach of like working within the system versus saying like, oh, I don't need this. I don't need the JD or whatever it is, right? Like I can just do this.
Totally. You need people on the inside that are changing things. You also need people on the outside, doing sort of outside pressure. But I think that Island, we talked about it. So Island by Aldous Huxley, this psychedelic paradise, but it gets destroyed by the oil company, in the Avatar movies. So in a world of nuclear weapons and global warming, there is no private utopias.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be all influenced by these bigger things. So the idea of the counterculture was in the 60s was in itself a self-defeating concept. Because when you self-define as the counterculture, then you're in opposition to culture. Culture is bigger. You're going to be crushed. Eventually your ideas may take place. But I totally encourage people to try to keep integrity with what they believe and try to move into the system. That we need to change from the inside out, from the heart of the system, from the heart of the beast. That's where we need to go.
Cool. Yeah. I think on that note, we can close it. Awesome.
Great.
Yeah, maybe last word. I think we're all just looking for the right setting. Thanks so much for joining ours today.
Oh, well, I'm so glad we did this outside, and I hope the basketball didn't make too much noise from the neighbor, but it's been a pleasure.
It's
Yeah.
been an absolute
absolutely.
pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this.
Great.
All right.